The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt has a reputation for being one of the most beautiful, rich, and engaging RPGs ever made, with it being a somewhat unique case in the fact that the Witcher game series is actually a sequel to the very famous Polish book series written by Andrzej Sapkowski. Due to the fact that you do not play as a character you make, but rather a character with history, with morals already outlined by those pre-existing novels, but the way the game really puts you into that character's shoes and throws you on one of the most incredible journeys in gaming is just one small thing that makes this game truly stand out. Hi, my name is Bry, and if you're new here, I talk about games all the time, and today is The Witcher 3. And if you can tell by the length of this video, I have a lot to say about it. The Witcher 3 is one of, if not my favorite game of all time. And if you don't care about my little history with the franchise, I have timestamps down below. So if you want to like skip around and get to the meat of the video, you can. But if you're staying, essentially this franchise means a lot to me. Back in 2015, Witcher 3 was actually my first introduction to The Witcher 3. I beat it in like a week, and I was hooked, and over the next few years, I picked up the books, went through the first two Witcher games, and even tried out the Netflix show.
Fuck.
All that to say, this franchise is very near and dear to my heart. And when it was leaked that The Witcher 3 is actually set to receive new DLC, I was pretty excited and just kind of used it as another excuse to boot up the game and sink another 100 hours into it. And it's really exciting to see that the DLC might actually bridge the gap to The Witcher 4, which hopefully we will see either this year or next year, probably next year. And as I was playing it, I was kind of like, why do I like this game so much? Is it the story, the characters, the gameplay, the exploration, the side quests, the side activities, the immersion within the world itself? Perhaps a combination of that all. So that is how I winded up here because I am sure, like most of you who are watching this, you have beaten the game, you either want to immediately play it again or just simply talk about it with everybody, and that's kind of how I am. And honestly, with Witcher 4 coming at some point in the future, I think now is the perfect time to really examine what made Witcher 3 so special. Because, yeah, this game is over 10 years old at this point, and everybody knows it's incredible, but that's exactly why it's worth taking a closer look. What design choices still hold up today? What feels dated? What lessons did other RPGs learn from this game? And what lessons did they completely miss? As we approach the next entry in the series, understanding what worked and what didn't in The Witcher 3 feels more important than ever. Now, originally, this video was going to encompass Hearts of Stone, Blood and Wine, and delve into the development of this game and the expansions I just mentioned, but as I was writing the script, it just simply got too long for one video. So, this current video will simply just be the base game. I still plan on covering the expansions in the future, so subscribe and like the video if you are interested in that. And to properly structure this, I just want to be ultra clear about what this video is. This isn't sort of a traditional review. You already know if the game is good. You've probably already played it. Instead, this is more like a analytical playthrough where we're going to stop at key moments throughout the game to examine specific design choices that they make in narrative techniques and systems that make the game work the way it does, and some of them that kind of fall flat. Sometimes we'll talk about what's brilliant, sometimes we'll talk about what doesn't quite land, but the goal is to really dig into the how and why of this game's design rather than just saying, yep, it's good, and moving on. So, I'm simply going to go through the game as we play it and basically just talk about it and be honest with you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we discover why The Witcher 3 still outclasses other modern RPGs. And as I just said a moment ago, one of the most fascinating and truly impressive things about this game is not only is it the third entry in the game series, it also serves as a sequel to the entire book series. So how does CDPR manage to not only have this game serve as a really good starting point for the franchise, but also clue newcomers in to what characters are like without over explaining things so that longtime fans don't feel out of place, and have the writing and conversations that clue you into these characters and events actually make sense and do not just feel like forced exposition. It is a truly monumental task that I would like to keep in the back of my mind as we play through this game to essentially see how CDPR balances making this a meaningful addition to the Witcher universe that almost serves as an excellent bookend to the entire thing, but also serving as an excellent jumping on point for newcomers. The game opens with Geralt in the bath at Kaer Morhen. Yennefer interrupts him by conjuring a small insect monster and reminds him he's supposed to be training with Ciri. Geralt gets dressed and needs to find the key to leave the room. Around the guest room, Geralt can expect various items like clothes on the bed, jewelry, perfume, each prompting brief conversations with Yennefer, who just keeps pushing him to hurry up. Finds the key and heads out, briefly stopping on the balcony to take in the view of the castle and the surrounding mountains. Heading downstairs, Geralt finds Vesemir passed out during one of Ciri's lessons. He was teaching her about ghouls and owl ghouls, but fell asleep. Ciri ditched her studies to practice sword work in the courtyard instead. Vesemir wakes up and Geralt heads down to meet with Ciri. Geralt talks with Ciri in the courtyard. She admits she actually finished Vesemir's lessons before he dozed off, and Vesemir proposes combat training and they spar, going through sword techniques, signs, and other combat fundamentals. I figure now is just as good a time as any to talk about the combat in this game, seeing as this will most likely be your first experience with combat, given you don't skip the tutorial. The Witcher 3 is not known for excellent combat. It is one of the only negative perceptions about the game that I see online, but personally, I don't really agree with it. Is the combat as amazing as dialogue and quests? Obviously not, which is why I think so much negativity comes from it, is just simply because it is surrounded by 11 out of 10 experiences like the dialogue and quests, whereas the combat is just, like a 7 out of 10 experience. So it kind of just sticks out like a sore thumb. But I do think recent changes to the game have improved the combat by a very large margin, which I will get into here just a moment. Now, combat, I believe, gets better the further you get into the game. Surprise, surprise. So here we will purely focus on how the combat is in the prologue section. It's a little slow, you don't fight the most interesting of monsters, and it can all feel a little spammy. Combat in this game consists of your usual light attacks, heavy attacks, and blocking and parrying. Pretty standard stuff, but where The Witcher for me shines is in the signs system. Witchers have access to signs, which are essentially just little spells. Ard pushes enemies back with a wave of concussive force. Igni shoots a quick wave of fire with a chance to ignite an enemy to deal continuous damage. Yrden puts a small area of effect that, when entered, causes enemies to be slowed down. Axii allows players to momentarily stun enemies, as well as having use in certain dialogue options to influence people's minds. And finally, Quen, which puts a protective shield around Geralt that is broken when struck, and boy, do I have a lot to say about Quen. I'll save that for just a little later when combat gets a little bit more interesting and intense. The signs add a lot of variety to what would be a very dull combat system by just simply giving you more tools to work with. And with this being a Monster Hunter game, a lot of these signs will come in handy later, as most of the monsters have a particular weakness to one or two of the signs, making fighting them a lot easier. As Geralt, you have access to two swords, steel for human and silver for monsters. Most of the time, this will not matter to you in a gameplay sense besides gear related mechanics, or unless you turn off the auto unsheath option and have to manually select the sword you will use to fight with. It's still cool, and we love it because aesthetically it makes Geralt look like a badass. Now, I do want to say that I think there is a clear distinction between the combat of launch and the combat of the next gen editions that a lot of the haters neglect to mention, or they just do not simply know about. Typically, when you engage in combat in this game, you will use a wide variety of the signs frequently, but when you want to switch, you will have to pull up the select wheel, and it just completely slows the combat down. And if you were like me, you use basically all of them very frequently, and this scroll wheel right here is just ass. It completely kills the pace of a fight having to open this menu up every time you want to switch signs. I've seen so many videos where people just set it to Igni or Quen and just leave it there because they don't want to switch, and honestly, I get it. But with the release of the next gen edition, we got access to an option known as quick casting, which I will say is most definitely a backported mechanic from The Witcher 4. What this does is, previously you would press the right trigger to cast your selected sign. Now you hold it and it converts your face buttons into corresponding signs. For instance, I simply hold down the trigger and press A to cast Ard, Next time I hold it down, I press B to quickly get myself a shield. Much more snappy, responsive, and it just feels better because I'm no longer having to go into menus to use signs. They're all just right here and available, and they never slow down the pace of the combat. This instantly improves the combat by multitudes for me. The next gen edition also added alternate cameras for a more modern, closer offset camera, which reminds me of how the camera is in like God of War, for instance. I'm not a fan of this personally, as you basically cannot see anything around you compared to the normal camera, and when you get into harder difficulties here in a little while, this becomes a detriment to the overall experience. But that is essentially the foundation of combat. We'll come back to this later when combat gets a little bit more in depth than the tutorial segment here. After the training session, Ciri accidentally knocks the helmet off a practice dummy positioned on the castle walls. She goes to retrieve it, a moment passes, and Geralt senses something is wrong and examines the dummy. The weather suddenly changes, and the wild hunt appears on the horizon. They attack, and Ciri is killed right in front of Geralt. He wakes up, and it was all just a dream. Geralt is actually camped in the middle of a war-ravaged landscape, and he is here following Yennefer's trail. He and Vesemir discuss the dream and how to proceed with finding Yennefer, and as they break camp and prepare to leave, a pack of ghouls ambushes them. Geralt draws his silver sword and makes pretty quick work of them. With the area cleared, Geralt spots something glittering on near the path. It's the crystal skull from the opening cinematic. He collects it and then saddles up with Vesemir to ride along the main road. As they cross a bridge near the ransacked village, they encounter a merchant cowering beneath his cart, and a griffin is feeding on his dead horse. The Witchers intervene, and in the brief fight, Vesemir takes a light wound before the griffin grabs the horse carcass and flies off. The grateful merchant offers Geralt 50 crowns of reward. Geralt can either accept this or refuse it. The Witchers mount up again and ride into White Orchard, a village that was once a part of Temeria, but now sits under Nilfgaardian control. They head to the inn. Geralt talks with the owner, but she doesn't know anything about the woman he's searching for. She suggests asking other travelers instead. Vesemir takes this opportunity to tend to his wound, leaving Geralt to handle the investigation alone. Inside the tavern, Geralt has three potential conversations. He can talk to two peasants sitting near Vesemir's table. Using Axii on them gets additional information. There's also a scholar named Aldert Geert who doesn't know anything about Yennefer but tells a really interesting story and introduces Geralt to Gwent, a trading card game. And I really, really want to talk about Gwent, but that is just a whole thing for me. So I'm just going to save that later for when we get around the area where you can partake into the tournament at the Passiflora. I feel like that'll just fit in better. But anyways, we'll get back to the story. The important conversation here is with Gaunter O'Dim, a merchant turned vagrant. O'Dim recognizes Yennefer from Geralt's description, and he tells Geralt that Yennefer spoke with the local Nilfgaardian captain before riding off again. O'Dim suggests heading to the Nilfgaardian garrison for more information. After leaving the inn, three men corner Geralt, the same troublemakers from an earlier cutscene. Using Axii incapacitates one of them, and Geralt can also choose to fight just one person, keeping the other two out of it until the first is defeated. Either way, Geralt handles the situation and continues on his way. Now, here I feel like on our way to the garrison is about as good a time as any to talk about what some might consider a problem, and that is just kind of the pace of the start of this game in White Orchard and how it has kind of this reputation of being quote unquote boring. White Orchard just has this reputation as a part of The Witcher 3 where the game just kind of drags its feet, where new players get bored and bounce off what is otherwise considered one of the greatest RPGs ever made. You see it all the time in forums and comment sections. Just push through White Orchard, the game gets better after, or I quit during White Orchard, does it actually improve? And I think this reputation is both completely understandable and also kind of missing the point of what White Orchard is actually trying to do. Let's be real here for a second. White Orchard is slow. That is just objectively true. You're doing fetch quests for the local populace. You're helping some random merchant find his brother. The stakes are incredibly low compared to what the game eventually becomes. You're not hunting down Ciri yet. You're not making world-altering decisions. You're just existing in this very small corner of the world, doing relatively mundane Witcher work. And for people who came into this game expecting to immediately jump into epic monster hunting, morally gray decisions that they've heard so much about, I can totally understand the disappointment with this starting section. But here's where I think the criticism misses the mark. White Orchard isn't slow because the developers didn't know how to hook players. It's slow because it's teaching you how to be a witcher in this world. And that's fundamentally different from teaching you how to play an RPG. Think about what White Orchard actually does. It drops you into a war-torn region where the Nilfgaardians have just swept through and the local population is trying to survive. Nobody gives a shit that you're legendary Geralt of Rivia. The smith treats you like any other customer, the herbalist is more concerned about her supplies, and the Nilfgaardian commander views you as a useful tool at best. You're not the chosen one here, you're just a contractor. It's the Griffin contract that everyone points to as the highlight of White Orchard. You don't just walk up and fight it. You investigate the scene, you talk to witnesses, you track it down, you prepare with the right oils and potions, and then you fight it. The game is deliberately showing you the rhythm of being a Witcher: preparation, investigation, and execution. It's not about rushing from one epic encounter to the next, it is about the work that goes into each hunt. And yeah, for an opening area, that's a slower burn than most games would dare to attempt. This world is brutal and random, and people die for stupid reasons all the time. Even the frying pan quest, as silly as it is teaching you that Witcher work isn't always glamorous monster slaying. Sometimes it's just helping people with their mundane problems because you need the coin. Now, do I think White Orchard is perfect? Absolutely not. The pacing could definitely be tighter in some spots, and I think the game front loads a bit too much tutorial stuff without letting you experiment enough. The arson quest in particular feels like it goes on forever with relatively little payoff, and I understand why someone coming off a more action focused game might find this whole thing a little bit tedious, but I also think a lot of people who say it gets better after White Orchard are kind of telling on themselves about what they value in the game. Because if you find White Orchard boring, you might actually find a lot of the main game boring. The structure doesn't fundamentally change here. You're still going to be investigating scenes, talking to NPCs, doing contracts that involve a lot of legwork before the actual monster fight. Velen and Novigrad are just bigger and have higher stakes, sure, but the moment to moment gameplay that's established right here in White Orchard. What White Orchard lacks is more just the urgency and the spectacle of the actual open world. And I think that's what people are really responding to when they call it slow. The game just hasn't given you enough reason really to care yet. The world hasn't opened up to feel truly massive, and the monsters you're fighting aren't particularly memorable. It's all foundation building, and foundation building is inherently less exciting than the structure you have eventually built on top of it. So, does White Orchard really deserve its reputation as being slow and boring? Yeah, I guess kind of. It is slow, and if you're not invested in the world of the minutia of being a Witcher, it can definitely feel boring, but I think that slow and bad are two very different things. White Orchard is deliberately paced to introduce you to a specific type of game, and if that type of game isn't for you, no amount of just wait until you get to the Bloody Baron is going to change that. For me personally, I appreciate White Orchard more and more on replays than I did the first time through. Once you know what the game becomes, you can kind of see all the careful setup happening in this little starter zone. But I also completely understand somebody booting up this for the first time, spending a few hours fetching pans and tracking muddy footprints, and thinking, is this really what all the hype is about? The answer is yes, but also no, but also yes. It's complicated, much like everything else in this game. After speaking with the Nilfgaardian commander at White Orchard Garrison about Yennefer's whereabouts, Geralt was told that the information will not be given freely. The commander demands proof of service first, explaining that a griffin has been terrorizing the area and that his soldiers have failed to kill it. Geralt wants answers, he'll have to deal with the beast himself. Geralt begins investigating the Griffin's attacks, though the order of this investigation can vary. He may encounter a reclusive hunter named Mislov in the woods who has been tracking wild dogs and knows where the Griffin struck a Nilfgaardian patrol. Mislov agrees to lead Geralt to the site after dealing with the dogs, though this step isn't mandatory. If Geralt discovers the Griffin's nest or other key clues beforehand, Mislov can be entirely skipped and never become involved. This right here is one of those unique quest interactions that I will keep highlighting as we go through this and why this game is just so highly replayable. On a second playthrough, a lot of this game can actually just be shortcutted if you know where to go or what to do. You can skip a lot of these more mundane elements of quests and just kind of get straight into the meat of it. At the site of the attack, Geralt examines the remains of what was once a celebration discarded bottles, an abandoned campfire, bloodstains, and Nilfgaardian tracks leading away from the scene. Following these tracks across a broken bridge and into the hills leads him to the Griffin's nest. There, the Griffin finds the corpse of a dead soldier, more scattered bones, and the body of a female Griffin. From the evidence, he pieces together what happened. Nilfgaardian soldiers killed the Griffin's mate while she slept, provoking the surviving male into a very violent rampage against anyone nearby. To prepare for the hunt, Geralt seeks out Tamara, the local herbalist, who helps him craft bait using buckthorn, harvested from the nearby riverbed. During this visit, Geralt can also learn about a dying girl under Tamara's care, which leads into a sort of tutorial to brew Swallow, which is the game's main source of healing in combat. If Geralt already has Buckthorn before meeting her, this step is completed automatically and the visit becomes optional, much like the previous step with the hunter. Once the preparations are complete, Geralt reunites with Vesemir at the White Orchard Inn. Vesemir has already chosen a nearby field as an ambush site and provides Geralt with a crossbow to help deal with the griffin once it takes to the air. The bait draws the creature in, and here is where we get our first little major boss fight of the game, as well as our first chance to use the crossbow. First, I will talk about the crossbow. This has to be one of the most underutilized features in this game. Essentially, after this fight, it just becomes a glorified cosmetic piece to make you look cooler. The crossbow deals next to no damage, the manual aiming is so unintuitive and clunky, and recently I just learned that the little flashing the reticle does is actually the accuracy of the bolt. I don't really feel like this choice of UI design really illustrates what it is doing, and it's just such a dim fade that the reticle does. And I'm not even entirely sure if what I'm saying is true. It's just something I read, but the fact that I don't know is kind of a con to the UI design and just to the crossbow as a whole. There are just simply very few times that this crossbow comes in handy and they feel purely like gimmicks. Take this Griffin fight, for example. You need it to knock him out of the sky. After that, it is useless other than for similar boss fights where you need to do the same thing. Pretty much after this fight, it is useless for the rest of the game. The only other time I can think of it coming in handy is it will actually one-shot creatures underwater. It is just one of those gameplay systems that are so bad that I don't even see why you would bother putting it in the game if it's just going to be useless. Now, as for the Griffin fight itself, it is a great introduction to the actual monster killing part of the monster killing game. Up to this point, you have probably only fought ghouls and drowners, so this is really your first real monster. In terms of complexity, the fight is really not that difficult. It's more just a fun showcase which lets you get used to the base mechanics of the game. My only real complaint here is that I wish there would have been some reason for Vesemir to get knocked out of the fight. As for the most part, you can actually be pretty passive and just let Vesemir take it on by himself if you really wanted to. It's not the biggest issue, but for the first real fight in the game, it would feel better for me personally if you, as the player, were actually forced to do it and have sort of a prolonged struggle, but it's not the biggest deal in the world. So, after a struggle, the beast is finally slain, and Geralt takes its head as proof. With the griffin dead, Geralt returns to the garrison. The commander honors their agreement and reveals that Yennefer has traveled to Vizima. After finishing the contract, Geralt returns to the inn to meet Vesemir and prepare for their departure. The atmosphere here has shifted. The local villagers are now openly hostile toward the innkeeper for serving Nilfgaardians. A confrontation breaks out, and while Geralt can attempt to ignore it, the situation is just scripted to escalate. Unlike previous encounters where Axii or dialogue could bypass a fight, this ends in a mandatory combat sequence against the drunken villagers. Once the fight is over, the game shows the immediate fallout. The bartender is horrified by the violence and demands the Witchers leave immediately, fearing the Nilfgaardian garrison will retaliate against the village for their deaths. There is no reward or gratitude for saving her. It serves as sort of this final beat of the White Orchard chapter and just shows you how dark and depressing this world can get. And as Geralt and Vesemir exit the tavern, they are interrupted by Yennefer and a Nilfgaardian detachment. Geralt and Yennefer travel with an escort toward Vizima, but along the way they are attacked by hounds of the Wild Hunt. Geralt's head is full of questions as he arrives at the royal palace. Why has Yennefer been summoned here? What has she gotten herself into? Why is the hunt pursuing them? And what does the Emperor want? When will he get to play Gwent again? All very important questions, and these questions lead him to prepare for an audience with Emir Var Emreis, the Emperor of Nilfgaard, the most powerful ruler in the world and the father of Ciri. Inside the palace, Geralt is briefed by Voorhees, the Imperial General, who can ask him about key events from The Witcher 2, which is a very excellent and clever way to carry over choices when importing save is not necessarily an option, and also makes sense within the dialogue. These choices can slightly alter future interactions, but don't change the core of the game itself. They kind of just add some side quests and dialogue here and there. He then gets dressed and is taught how to bow before being led through the grand halls to meet Emir. When Geralt stands before the Emperor, he has the option to bow or not, and I think we all know that we ain't fucking bowing to this prick. Emir wastes little time and he explains that his daughter Cirilla has returned from a distant land and is now being hunted by the Wild Hunt. And he asks Geralt to find Ciri before the Wild Hunt does. After the audience, Geralt walks with the Chamberlain back through the palace and is directed to Yennefer's room. Yennefer fills him in on her own efforts to locate Ciri, and together they begin to formulate a plan. Geralt will start searching in Velen for leads, while Yennefer will investigate a magical explosion in Skellige, and both agree to reconnect with allies in the regions. Once Yennefer leaves, Geralt can gather any remaining supplies or information in the palace before retrieving his equipment and departing. After parting with Yennefer in Vizima, Geralt travels on toward Velen in hopes of finding leads on Ciri. His first stop is in the Inn of the Crossroads. It's a lonely tavern along the way where he intends to ask about an Imperial agent named Hendrik, who was working on Ciri's case. Inside the inn, Geralt can either dive straight into conversation with the innkeeper or listen to some locals first. But the events quickly take a turn when three of the Bloody Baron's men show up looking for trouble. Depending on how Geralt handles them, whether he scares them off by revealing he's a Witcher, talks them down, or ends up fighting them, the confrontation plays out slightly differently, and his choice here can affect how easy it is to deal with the Baron's forces later in the Bloody Baron quest. Once the situation at the crossroads is resolved, the innkeeper finally shares what he knows. Hendrik was last seen in the nearby village of Heatherton, which has since been ravaged. Riding there, Geralt finds the village attacked and a few rabid dogs savaging a lone survivor. After dispatching the beasts, the man tells Geralt that the Wild Hunt struck Heatherton, and that Hendrik was singled out, tortured for information, and killed. Geralt then searches Hendrik's hut. Using his Witcher senses, he finds the agent's body and uncovers a hidden key in his boots. That key opens a trapdoor beneath the rug, leading down into a cellar. There, by activating a candlestick on the wall, Geralt reveals a hidden trunk containing Hendrik's notes, which provides two crucial leads. One pointing toward the Bloody Baron at Crow's Perch, and the other toward a witch near Mid-Copse. And he can choose which lead to pursue first. Now, this is our first foray into the open world of The Witcher 3. White Orchard gave us like a little taste of this map, but the Velen and Novigrad map is really where the game starts to shine. One of the things that has always struck me about The Witcher 3's open world is that it never feels empty, but it also never feels overwhelming. And I know that sounds like a contradiction because we've all played open world games where that swing really one direction or the other. Either you're riding through vast stretches of absolutely nothing, or you're being bombarded with icons and activities every 5 seconds to the point where you just start ignoring them. But The Witcher 3 somehow threads this needle in a way that very few games have managed to replicate. And a lot of that comes down to CDPR's design philosophy. It's something that I've heard referred to as the 30-second rule. Now, I don't know if 30 seconds is the exact number they used internally, but the principle here is pretty clear. When you actually pay attention to how the world is structured, the idea is that you should never go more than about 30 seconds without encountering something, a point of interest, an enemy encounter, bit of environmental storytelling, beautiful vista, just something to keep you engaged with the world that you're traveling through. And that's what's brilliant about it, is that it's not cluttering the map with busy work. It's about pacing the exploration in a way that feels natural and keeps your attention without feeling artificial. Let me give you a concrete example. Say you're traveling from one quest marker to another in Velen. You're on Roach, you're following the roads because the game actually makes roads useful, unlike a lot of other open world games. And within that first 30 seconds or so, you might pass by a hangman's tree with some loot, or you'll hear someone screaming for help off the road, or you'll stumble across a monster nest. The game is constantly giving you these little moments of interaction or interest that prevent the travel from feeling like dead time. And here's the key thing. Most of these encounters are completely optional. The game isn't forcing you to engage with everything you come across. If you want to ignore that group of bandits and just keep riding, you can do that. If you want to bypass that monster nest and stay focused on your current quest, that is totally valid. But the option is always there. And more importantly, the world feels lived in because these things exist whether you interact with them or not. Compare this to something like an Assassin's Creed game where the map is just plastered with icons and every single one of them is essentially the same activity copy and pasted 50 times. That's not environmental design, that's just a checklist. The Witcher 3's approach is fundamentally different because the encounters you find feel like they exist as part of the world's ecosystem, rather than being placed there purely for gameplay purposes. Yeah, obviously they are placed there for gameplay purposes, but the illusion is maintained so well that it rarely feels that way. The other brilliant thing about the design philosophy is how it scales based on the region you're in. In White Orchard, the pacing is a bit slower because it's smaller and a more self contained area, and you're still kind of learning the ropes. But once you get to Velen, the 30-second rule really kicks in. Velen is this massive war torn region, and the density of encounters reflects that. You've got deserters, monsters feeding on corpses, peasants, bandit camps, and all of this stuff that reinforces the idea that this is a land that has been completely devastated by war. The environmental storytelling and the encounter design work together to create this sense of place. Then you get to Novigrad and the rule adapts again. In the city, it's less about combat encounters and more about NPC interaction, the architecture, bits of dialogue you overhear, streets that lead to interesting discoveries. The game understands that something happening every 30 seconds doesn't just mean a fight every 30 seconds. It just means maintaining engagement through variety. Skellige takes yet another approach. The islands here are more spread out so the pacing adjusts. You're sailing between locations, and the game uses smugglers' caches, sirens, and those Nordic landscapes to keep you engaged during the travel. The pacing is different, but the principle remains the same. You're never just holding forward on the stick, waiting to arrive somewhere. Now, is the system perfect? No, and I think some of the cracks start to show if you're a completionist trying to clear every single question mark off the map. Those smuggler caches in Skellige in particular become incredibly repetitive, and I think CDPR learned from this because they dialed back the sheer number of points of interest in the expansion, Blood and Wine. It especially feels more curated with fewer but more meaningful encounters. But even when the system falters, I appreciate what it's trying to do because the alternative is what we see in so many modern open world games, either sterile, empty landscapes where fast travel is just mandatory because actually traversing the world is just boring as hell, or theme park design where everything is so densely packed and formulaic that exploration just loses any and all sense of discovery. You're not just getting from point A to B, you're experiencing the journey itself, and because of that 30-second rule or whatever internal metric they were using, that journey almost always feels worthwhile. You might set out to do one contract and end up stumbling into three other things along the way, and that feels organic rather than overwhelming because the pacing here is just so well calibrated. That is also why I think a lot of open world games that came after The Witcher 3 struggled to capture the same magic. They saw the surface level stuff with the question marks, the point of interest, the side content, but they didn't understand the underlying philosophy about pacing and the density and making sure that the world itself is actually interesting to exist in. You can't just copy the systems, you have to understand why those systems work. For me, this is one of the reasons The Witcher 3's open world still holds up this well over a decade later. It's not about having the biggest map or the most icon or the most realistic graphics. It's just about understanding that traversal is a huge part of the open world experience. And that if traversal is boring, this entire thing just falls apart. CDPR got that. And they designed their world with the principle baked into every single region, every road, and every stretch of forest or coastline. So, yeah, whether it's exactly 30 seconds or not, the principle is sound and the execution is damn near flawless. It's one of those things that you might not consciously notice on your first playthrough, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it makes you realize just how much thought went into making this world feel alive and in a way that respects your time while still rewarding exploration. After following the lead from Hendrik's notes and arriving at Crow's Perch to ask the Bloody Baron about Ciri, Geralt quickly realizes this meeting won't be straightforward. The Baron is rumored to be a violent warlord, but when Geralt finally confronts him, the man is surprisingly resigned and blunt, admitting he did see Ciri pass through his lands, but offering little information at first, only doing so in exchange for help with his own personal trouble. How Geralt gains entry to Crow's Perch depends on what happened during the Nilfgaardian connection earlier. If Geralt didn't kill the Baron's men back at the inn of the crossroads, local guards are willing to escort him straight through the castle gates to meet the Baron. Geralt and the Baron speak regardless of how he entered, and the Baron asks Geralt to follow him inside. The Baron will reveal how he met Ciri, who appeared exhausted, wounded, and soaking wet. Here is where we get our first Ciri flashback. Ciri is seen fleeing through the forest of Velen when she falls into a shallow riverbed. She encounters a pack of wolves and must fight them off. Nearby, a frightened girl named Gretka explains she can't return home because of the Wolf King. Ciri escorts her along the riverbed, facing another wolf attack. Gretka hides while Ciri handles them. Further along, they discover the mangled corpse of a villager near a broken boat. Ciri examines the wounds and determines it was a werewolf attack. Correctly identifying the threat allows her to craft proper oil for the coming fight, and it makes the encounter less difficult if you do. She gathers ingredients from the area, prepares a small fire, and follows Gretka toward a dark cave where the King of Wolves awaits. Inside the cave, Ciri fights the werewolf, and after the battle, she encounters a man who offers to guide Ciri and Gretka to Crow's Perch, hoping for a reward, but the Baron refuses to pay. Back in the present, the Baron explains he allowed Gretka to stay and help with chores. When Geralt presses for information about Ciri, the Baron refuses, letting Geralt know his wife and daughter have recently gone missing. After the Bloody Baron refuses to provide information about Ciri until his wife Anna and daughter Tamara are found, Geralt begins investigating at Crow's Perch. The Baron leads him to search the bedrooms, his own and Tamara's. In the Baron's room, Geralt finds a wooden candlestick, fresh flowers, and a picture of the Baron with his wife. Tamara's room is optional. It contains an ugly doll, a letter, incense, and an old key. Using his Witcher senses allows him to follow the scent of wine, and Geralt discovers a hidden talisman under a floorboard and a secret eternal fire altar with coals and a small prayer written by Tamara. When Geralt returns to the Baron with these findings, the Baron admits he was drunk the night Anna and Tamara disappeared. Doesn't know anything about any fight and likely spilled the wine himself. He made the doll and doesn't know the talisman's origins. Geralt is told that Anna would have sought help from the Peller near Blackbow. As Geralt approaches the Peller's hut, he may encounter the Baron's men outside. How this plays out depends on your previous actions. If Geralt killed the Baron's men at the crossroads, they attack on sight. Once inside, the Peller recognizes the talisman and agrees to help, but only if Geralt retrieves the goat princess. Returning the goat triggers the ritual augury. The Peller reveals that Anna was pregnant and miscarried due to abuse from the Baron, and the stillborn fetus has become a botchling. At this point, Geralt has a key choice. Either lift the curse to create a lubberkin, or kill the botchling, and use its blood for the Peller's tracking ritual. Before this, Geralt notices the stables on fire near Crow's Perch and chooses to rescue the trapped stable hand Oswin and the horses. Approaching the Baron triggers a fistfight, after which he confesses the abuse, his wife's miscarriage, and his anger issues. At midnight, the botchling emerges. If Geralt chooses to lift the curse, he must protect the Baron while wraiths attack along the way, casting Axii to calm the botchling when it wriggles. Once the ritual is complete at the threshold, the Baron names the botchling Dea, and it becomes a lubberkin. The lubberkin then leads Geralt to a smokehouse outside Crow's Perch, where he can investigate clothing, a bracelet, and later to an eviscerated horse guarded by rot fiends. Finally, it guides Geralt to a fisherman's hut, revealing that Anna was attacked by a beast and Tamara is safe in Oxenfurt. So, we're in the middle of the Bloody Baron questline right now, and I want to take a moment to talk to you about what makes this quest and really what makes The Witcher 3's quest design in general just so special. Because if this is your first time playing through this, you're experiencing one version of the story. But the thing is, there are just so many variations and branching paths woven into the questline that two players can have fundamentally different experiences. Let's talk about the botchling decision you just made. Assuming you have gotten that far, the Baron asks you to lift the curse on his miscarried child that's become this horrific monster. You have two options. You can either fight and kill it, or perform a ritual to transfer it into a lubberkin, which is a more benign spirit that can help you. On the surface, this seems like a simple choice, violent solution versus peaceful solution. But the way this plays out and the way it affects the Baron's character arc is where the design philosophy really shines. If you choose to fight the botchling, you get this intense combat sequence where the Baron has to watch Geralt kill what was once his child. It's brutal, it's visceral, and it adds another layer of tragedy through this already tragic story. The Baron becomes more withdrawn and more haunted. The weight of that violence can hang over the rest of the quest line. If you choose the ritual, you'll get this completely different experience. The Baron has to carry the botchling's corpse to the family burial site and getting attacked along the way, and then participate in this somber ceremony. It's slower, it's more contemplative, and it gives the Baron a chance at something resembling redemption or closure. The Lubberkin then helps you find Anna, and there's this sense that maybe, the Baron can start to make amends for his past. It's the same quest, but you get two completely different tones and experiences. And here's the kicker: the game doesn't tell you which choice is right. There is no morality meter, no Baron will remember that notification. You make the choice based on what feels right for your version of Geralt, and the game respects that choice by making both paths equally valid and equally well developed. But it goes deeper than that. The entire Baron questline is filled with these smaller moments of reactivity that you might not even notice on a first playthrough. The way you talk to the Baron, whether you show sympathy or disdain, actually affects his dialogue and his willingness to open up to you. It's subtle, but it's there, and it makes this character feel more real because he's actually responding to how you're treating him. Then there's the whole situation with the crones and the orphans, which ties directly into the Baron's quest line. The choice you make there to save this tree spirit or not has massive ramifications for what happens to Anna. And this is where The Witcher 3's quest design really gets interesting, because the right choice isn't always clear cut. Kill the spirit and the orphans die, but Anna survives and the village is spared. There's no good option, only different kinds of bad, and the game forces you to live with the consequences. What's brilliant about this is that the game doesn't just branch at these major decision points and then converge back into the same outcome. The ripples from these choices affect the entire quest line and beyond that. The Baron's fate is directly tied to what happens to Anna. If Anna dies or is transformed into a water hag, the Baron's reaction and his ultimate fate changes. If Anna survives, you get a completely different ending to the story. And all of this is determined by choices you made that seem separate at the time. This is what I mean when I talk about CDPR's quest design philosophy. It's not about giving you obvious good and evil choices. It's not about railroading you toward a predetermined outcome. It's about creating these complex, interwoven narrative threads where your choices actually matter and lead to genuinely different experiences. And the key thing is that the game commits to these branches. It's not just different dialogue, it is whole different scenes, different outcomes, and different emotional beats. Compare this to a lot of other RPGs where choice is basically an illusion. You get dialogue options that all lead to the same place, or you make a big choice that gets resolved in the next scene so it doesn't actually affect anything. The Witcher 3 doesn't do that. When you make a choice here, you're shaping the story in ways that will play out over hours of gameplay. The Baron questline also exemplifies another aspect of Witcher 3's design philosophy: moral complexity. The Baron is an abusive drunk who beat his wife and drove his daughter away. Those are facts. The game doesn't shy away from them, but he's also a broken man dealing with trauma, grief, and guilt. He's capable of moments of genuine tenderness and remorse. The game presents him as a complete person. He's not a simple villain or a simple victim, and it just trusts you to navigate the complexity of his character yourself. And this moral ambiguity extends to your choices. Is it better to give the Baron closure, even if it means dealing with a lubberkin? Or is it cleaner to just kill the botchling and move on? Is saving children worth an entire village? These aren't questions with right answers, and the game knows that. It's asking you to engage with difficult moral terrain and then showing you the consequences of your decisions without judging you for them. On a replay, this questline becomes even more impressive because you start to notice all these little details you missed the first time: the environmental storytelling in the Baron's castle, the way his quarters are a mess, the way the servants talk about him, the little notes and letters you can find that fill in backstory, the way the Baron's voice actor delivers certain lines differently depending on which path you're on, the way NPCs react to the Baron's fate later in the game, if you happen to run into them. This is just what sets The Witcher 3 apart from a lot of other open world RPGs. It's not just about having choices, it's about making those choices meaningful and following through on them with real narrative consequences. It's about creating quests that feel different on replays, not because you're doing different content, but because the same content can play out in fundamentally different ways based on your decisions. And the Baron questline is just one example. This design philosophy is woven through the entire game. Almost every major questline has this level of branching and reactivity. The game is constantly asking you to make difficult choices and then showing you the weight of those choices through its storytelling. Now, does this mean every single quest in The Witcher 3 is as complex as the Baron? No, obviously not. There are plenty of more straightforward contracts and side quests, but even those often have little moments of choice and consequence that add up to make the world feel reactive and alive. In the major quest lines, the ones that really matter, almost always follow this philosophy of meaningful choice and branching narrative. As you continue through the Baron's story, pay attention to how your choices are shaping the experience. Think about what might be different if you'd chosen otherwise, and maybe, just maybe, start planning that second playthrough where you make different choices to see how things play out. Because that's the beauty of this quest design. It is just built for multiple playthroughs, built to reward you for exploring different paths and seeing how the story changes. Bloody Baron questline is, in my opinion, one of the best examples of quest design in any RPG ever made, and we're only in Velen. This is just the beginning of what this game has to offer in terms of quest design, and it only gets better from here. Geralt picks up one other lead from Hendrik's notes, indicating that Ciri had quarreled with a witch near the village of Midcopse. Geralt's first task is to find out where the witch lives. He can learn her location in a few different ways. He can eavesdrop on two women near the well. Once Geralt follows the trail north of the village, passing landmarks like a pond, a lone boulder, he arrives at the witch's hut. A crowd of villagers gathered outside asking for help, but the witch dismisses them once she's finished. When Geralt enters the hut, the witch herself is nowhere to be seen. Using his witcher senses to investigate, Geralt finds only mundane items and a skull with inscribed symbols. Touching the skull causes it to glow and open a portal to another location. Geralt is transported to a mystical underground cavern. At the center stands a building, and Geralt approaches the witch, Ciri Metz. Kira is an old acquaintance, and after some conversation, she explains she actually hasn't encountered Ciri herself. She does, however, tell Geralt that a masked elven mage, someone also searching for Ciri, visited her recently and might know more. Kira offers to lead Geralt to the mage's hideout in the Elven Ruins, a location far to the southwest. Together, they enter the ruins, but it quickly becomes clear they're not alone. The Wild Hunt has already beaten them there and is searching the same place. Inside the ruins, Geralt and Kira attempt to pursue the Hunt's trail. Geralt asks Kira to open a portal to catch up, but when he follows her through it, the spell misfires and he emerges separated from her in a flooded cavern. After fighting through a group of drowners and swimming underwater, he uses his Witcher senses to locate Kira's voice. When Geralt finds Kira, she's trapped in a chamber overrun by rats, and they're constantly spawning nests. Once Kira is safe, they press deeper into the ruins to follow the projections left by the elven mage, which guide them by showing them the symbol of a swallow, a sign tied to Ciri's sword and past. Portals to the White Frost have been opened, threatening to engulf the ruins in a deadly cold. Kira conjures a protective shield, and Geralt must defend her while she works to close the three rifts, fighting off hounds of the Wild Hunt that pour through the portals. Once the rifts are closed, Kira dispels the ice blocking the next passage, and the two continue. Their chase culminates in a confrontation with a mounted member of the Wild Hunt known as Nithral. Geralt defeats this rider, and beyond him finds clues left behind by the elven mage: herbs, burnt notes, and an empty potion bottle and a book about the White Frost. After this, Geralt receives a book from Ciri Metz titled The Ladies of the Wood. Reading it tells him to seek a shrine deep within Crookback Bog and follow a strange trail of treats. Following the trail of treats leads Geralt into the swamp to a cluster of huts where he witnesses a group of orphans singing a rhyme. An old woman named Gran runs things here, and she refuses to let him talk to the boy who knows more unless he earns the trust of the other children. Geralt can do this by playing hide and seek, or by simply giving them treats so they can distract Gran. Once the children help, Geralt speaks with the boy who pointed him toward a marker east of the swamp. Here he encounters drowners and a water hag as he follows small footprints leading to Johnny, a silent godling who has lost his voice. Helping Johnny recover his voice involves tracking him through swamp terrain and overcoming more monsters, after which he reveals what he knows and offers to help contact the so-called ladies. Back at the orphanage, Johnny convinces Gran to bring Geralt before the ladies of the wood. Actually, the three crones of Crookback Bog. They acknowledge knowing of Ciri but refuse to talk until Geralt helps them with a problem. They direct him to the nearby village of Downwarren and instruct him to speak with the elderman there. The Elderman tells Geralt that the village is plagued by an evil force beneath an ancient oak tree. Using his Witcher senses, he follows the sound down into a cave beneath the tree where he meets a spirit trapped inside the roots. The spirit claims it was once a guardian of the woods, wronged by the crones, and promises to save the orphans from Crookback Bog if Geralt frees it. Geralt is faced with a choice: believe it and help it, or conclude it is dangerous and destroy it. Geralt frees the spirit. It helps ensure the safety of the orphans. However, freeing it also causes the spirit to attack and kill the villagers in Downwarren. If Geralt instead kills the spirit, either by attacking it directly or tricking it into letting its own heart be destroyed, the spirit dies and its malevolent influence ends. This path saves Downwarren and its villagers, but the orphans are left to the crones, likely to their death. I want to talk about something here that I think this quest illustrates perfectly: how CDPR manages to balance giving players meaningful choices while still respecting Geralt as an established character with his own personal history and moral code. Because this is actually a very difficult tightrope to walk on, and I think the Whispering Hillock is one of the clearest examples of both when this balance works and when it gets a little messy. Let me lay out the situation. You've got this ancient spirit trapped in a tree. It's being deliberately vague about what it actually is and what it'll do if you free it, and it's already demonstrating malevolent behavior. The people of Downwarren are suffering because of it. There are weird things happening in the area, and every instinct should be telling you that this is not something you want to unleash on the world. The spirit promises to save the orphan children from the crones if you free it, but it won't tell you how or what the cost will be. Now, if you know Geralt from the books or the previous games, the decision should be relatively straightforward. Geralt has dealt with spirits, monsters, and ancient entities his entire life. He knows that when something ancient and powerful is imprisoned, it's usually for a pretty good damn reason. He knows that vague promises from malevolent entities are almost never worth taking at face value. He's pragmatic, he's experienced, and he's seen enough to know that "free me and I'll help you" is one of the oldest and most dangerous tricks in the book. Book Geralt, or even Witcher 2 Geralt, would probably kill this thing and leave it trapped without much hesitation. Maybe he'd investigate more thoroughly first, but the idea of just freeing it based on a vague promise that doesn't align with who Geralt is as a character. He's not reckless, he's not naive, and he's definitely not the type to unleash a unknown evil on innocent people just because it might help him achieve his goals. But the game gives you the option to free it anyway, and here's where things get interesting from a design perspective. For newcomers to the franchise, players who don't know Geralt's established character and are just role playing their own version of him, this choice can seem more straightforward in the opposite direction. Free the spirit, save the kids. The game has shown you these innocent children being fed to the crones. It's giving you an option to save them, and if you're playing a good guy character making decisions based on modern RPG morality, freeing the spirit feels like the heroic choice. Save the children and deal with the consequences later. And this is where CDPR's balancing act comes into play. They can't punish newcomers for not knowing who Geralt should be. That would make the game inaccessible and would defeat the purpose of making this a good entry point for new players. But they also can't completely abandon Geralt's established character, because that would alienate fans who have been following this character through 8 books and 2 previous games. So, what does the game do? It gives you enough context and warning signs that someone familiar with Geralt would recognize these red flags, but it doesn't railroad you into the so called correct choice. And crucially, it provides a narrative justification for why even an experienced Geralt might make a choice he normally wouldn't: his desperation to find Ciri. This here is the key thing that really makes it work. The game has spent hours establishing that Geralt is desperate to find his daughter and that he's running out of leads, and that the crones clearly know something about her whereabouts. So, if you're playing as a Geralt who is willing to bend or break his usual principles to get closer to Ciri, suddenly freeing the spirit becomes somewhat justifiable. The game gives you that narrative wiggle room to make the choice without completely breaking Geralt as a character, but here's where I think the game's balancing act gets a little wobbly. The consequences of freeing the spirit are so catastrophic that it almost feels like the game is punishing you for not knowing better. An entire village gets slaughtered, and not just a few people, the entire village of Downwarren is wiped out because you freed the spirit. And while, yes, the orphans are saved, the cost is so extreme that it's hard not to feel like you made the wrong choice, even though the game is supposed to be about moral ambiguity rather than right and wrong. And I think that's where new players and experienced players have fundamentally different experiences with this quest. If you know Geralt, if you know the lore, if you understand how these things typically work in the Witcher universe, you see the warning signs and you make a pretty informed decision. But if you're new, you're just trying to save some kids, you might free the spirit and then get hit with the devastating consequence that you had no real way to anticipate. Now, you could argue this is the point in that the Witcher universe is brutal and unfair. Sometimes your good intentions lead to horrible outcomes, and that is absolutely true. But it also creates this weird tension where the game is simultaneously trying to be accessible to newcomers while also assuming a general knowledge and familiarity with Geralt's character that newcomers just wouldn't have. What I find fascinating is how do you let players roleplay their own version of Geralt while still maintaining who Geralt is? How do you give meaningful choices without making players feel like they're being punished for not reading 8 books and playing 2 previous games? How do you respect the established lore and character while also being welcoming to people experiencing this for the first time? The Whispering Hillock doesn't perfectly solve this problem, but it's a really interesting example of CDPR trying to thread this needle. They give you the choice, they give you the context clues, and they provide narrative justification for either decision, and then they follow through with consequences that feel appropriate to the Witcher universe. I also think this quest highlights something important about how CDPR approaches Geralt as a player. He's not a blank slate. He has opinions, he has experience, he has established relationships and personality traits. But within those parameters, there's still room for player expression. You can play Geralt as more mercenary or more heroic, as someone who prioritizes contracts or someone who helps people freely, someone who stays neutral or somebody who takes sides. The game gives you this flexibility within Geralt's character rather than giving you the complete freedom to define it. And honestly, I think that's the right approach for this game. A completely blank slate protagonist wouldn't work for a story this personal and but a completely rigid character wouldn't work for an RPG where player choice is supposed to matter. So, CDPR found this nice middle ground where you're playing as Geralt and with all that entails, but you still get to decide how he responds to the situations that he finds himself in. As we continue through the game, you'll see this balancing act play out in different ways. Some quests give you choices that all feel appropriate for Geralt, while some force you to choose between bad options where any version of Geralt will struggle. And some, like the Whispering Hillock, give you options where one choice feels more Geralt than the other, but the game still respects you as the player enough to let you have the agency to choose what you want to choose. It's not a perfect system, and I think reasonable people can disagree about whether certain choices break Geralt's character or not. What I appreciate is that CDPR clearly thought deeply about this balance and made deliberate choices about when to constrain the player. The Whispering Hillock might let you make a choice that Geralt wouldn't make, but it does so in a way that is narratively justified and consistent with the game's broader approach to consequence. And ultimately, I think that's what makes it work both as a sequel to the books and as an entry point for newcomers. The game doesn't require you to know everything about Geralt to play it, but it rewards the knowledge with a deeper understanding of choices you're making and characters you're playing as. It's a very delicate balance, and quests like the Whispering Hillock show the strengths and the limitations of that approach. After helping the crones with their problem, they finally tell Geralt how they encountered Ciri. According to them, when Ciri first arrived in Velen, she was exhausted and sought shelter in Crookback Bog, only to fall into the clutches of the crones. They did not intend to help her. Their plan was to feed on her and hand her over to the Wild Hunt. Ciri, overhearing their discussion, narrowly escapes through a window and bursts into the swamp. Once she's running through the bog, the general of the Wild Hunt, Imlereth, arrives on the crone's summons and begins pursuing her. Ciri must escape from the Crookback Bog on her own. Along the way, drowners and hounds of the Wild Hunt appear in her path and attempt to stop her, but she doesn't need to fight them. Her goal is just simply to put distance between herself and her enemies. As Ciri reaches the far end of the bog, she loses Imlereth for a moment by climbing a tree and waiting him out. When he gives up the immediate chase, she drops down and continues out of the swamp, only to trip over rocks as she leaves. This transitions directly to where we found her earlier with the King of Wolves quest. Traveling to Oxenfurt, Geralt searches for Tamara. The city may require a pass to enter, or Geralt can just choose to swim across the river. Geralt can reassure her, confirming that he's only checking on her safety, after which she explains her life under the Baron's abuse. She refuses to return home, having organized a group of witch hunters to find her mother. After resolving tomorrow's story, Geralt returns to the Baron at Crow's Perch. The Baron learns Anna's fate and is devastated. The Baron requests Geralt's help to rescue Anna from the crones in Brookback Bog. This is also the point at which the Baron explains the downward spiral of his marriage, the constant absences as a soldier, heavy drinking, Anna's infidelity, the murder of her lover by the Baron, and the onset of domestic abuse. Ciri's story once again picks back to a lighter moment from Ciri's time at Crow's Perch. After a successful hunt around a campfire with the boar roasting and the Baron's men enjoying themselves, Ciri jokingly proposes a wager. She can beat the Baron in a horse race, he must give her the mount of her choosing. The Baron accepts the challenge, and the next morning they mount up to a race. Ciri and the Baron ride neck and neck along a path towards a distant tower, serving as the finish line. Once the Ciri and the Baron approach the tower, a basilisk swoops down and lands at its base, interrupting the race and forcing both of them to draw their swords, attacking the basilisk, grabbing the Baron, and flying toward a nearby tower. Ciri pursues the creature. She uses her powers to reach the basilisk, saving the Baron from certain death. This brief use of her powers, however, alerts the wild hunt to her location. Recognizing that remaining near Crow's Perch endangers those around her, Ciri decides to leave Velen immediately and head for Novigrad, hoping to reunite with Dandelion and continue her journey safely. Before departing, a small, nonsensical creature named Uma appears in the Baron's chambers, and I just want you to remember Uma for now. The Bloody Baron is determined to rescue his wife Anna from the crones in Crookback Bog. Geralt accompanies him in a small group of witch hunters toward Downwarren, and Tamara is with him, desperate to find her mother. Geralt and the group march through the swamp toward the crones' huts. Along the way, they are ambushed by hostile creatures, groups of drowners, water hags, and ultimately a powerful fiend that bursts from the bog and attacks them. When they reach the orphanage and enter the crones' territory, Anna is found. If the spirit was killed during the Whispering Hillock quest, Anna has gone mad from grief and the loss of the children in her life, and the Baron accepts that she can't be restored. The Baron decides to take her away for treatment rather than attempting to break a supernatural curse. Alright, so we have just wrapped up the Blood Baron questline, and I want to talk about something that I absolutely love about this game, but also something that I think is just worth examining critically. Because if you've been paying attention to the structure of these early Velen quests, you probably notice a pattern, and that pattern is basically, oh, you need information from me. Well, I need you to do something first for me. The Baron does it, the Peller does it, hell, even the Ladies of the Wood do it in their own twisted way. Every single major lead you follow in the early game follows the same exact structure. You show up looking for Ciri, they dangle information in front of you, and then they immediately hit you with the, but first you need to help me with this completely separate issue. And look, I need to be clear here. I love these quests. The Bloody Baron storyline is legitimately one of the best quest lines in any RPG that I've ever played. And the Peller, he adds a little bit of flavor to the world. The Crones are phenomenal villains, and the actual content of these quests is not the problem. The problem is that the game relies so heavily on this specific narrative structure that it starts to feel formulaic, especially when you're doing them back to back. Think about it from Geralt's perspective for a second. Your adopted daughter is being hunted by an otherworldly force of armored specters. You're desperate to find her before they do, and every single person who might have information about her immediately leverages that desperation to get you to solve their problems first. Bear needs you to find his wife and daughter. The Peller needs his goat back. It's errand after errand after errand, and while each individual errand is well crafted, the cumulative effect is that the main quests start to feel less urgent than they should. Now, I get why the game does this. From a design perspective, it's pretty smart. These Help Me First quests serve multiple purposes. They introduce you to important characters, they flesh out the world and its problems, and they give you opportunities to make choices that matter. And they organically integrate side content into the main narrative path. The Baron questline in particular does an incredible job of making you care about this deeply flawed person and his equally troubled family, to the point where finding Anna tomorrow becomes just as important to you as finding Ciri. But that doesn't change the fact that there's a cognitive dissonance happening here. The game keeps telling you that finding Ciri is urgent through dialogue and cutscenes, but then it keeps showing you that actually, no, you've got time to help the local Baron with his domestic issues. The structure undermines the urgency that the story is trying to create. And here's the thing that really gets me. The game doesn't need to frame it this way every single time. There are other ways to integrate these characters and quest lines into the main narrative. The Witcher 3 does actually break this pattern occasionally, and when it does, it's noticeable and refreshing. Later in the game, you'll encounter characters who just help you or have their own motivations that align with yours without needing to be bribed or convinced. And those moments feel great because they're not following this established formula. And I also think this structure contributes to one of the common criticisms of the main quest is that it sort of drags in the middle because when every major story beat is go here, talk to this person, oh, they need you to do three things first, now go get three things. Now they'll tell you to go talk to someone else who will also need you to go do things first. It starts to feel less like a cohesive narrative and more like a series of fetch quests with really good writing attached. But here is where I have to give CDPR credit. They are just so good at writing these characters and these quests that most of the time you don't really mind. The Baron questline is a perfect example. Yes, structurally it is help me find my family and then I'll help you. But the execution here is so strong and the characters are so well developed. The moral complexity is just so rich that you kind of forget that you're being stonewalled from your major objective. The journey becomes more interesting than the destination, which is honestly what this game does best. And I think that might be the point, actually. The Witcher 3 is not a game about efficiently pursuing a goal. It's a game about getting sidetracked, about the messy, interconnected nature of people's problems, about how you can't just charge through the world solving your own issues without getting entangled in everyone else's. Geralt is a witcher. People hire him to solve problems. Of course, everyone he meets is going to have a problem that they need solved. That's literally his job. So maybe the help me first structure isn't a flaw. Maybe it's a feature. Maybe it's the game's way of constantly reminding you that Geralt exists in a world that doesn't revolve around his personal quest, and that the world is full of people with legitimate problems that matter just as much to them as finding Ciri matters to him. But even if that's the case, even if it's intentional and thematically appropriate, I still think the game leans on it a little too hard in these early hours, and a little more variety in how these quest lines are initiated will go a long way toward making the structure feel less predictable. Because once you notice the pattern, you can't really unnotice it. Every time you approach a new character who might have information, you're already anticipating the but first that is inevitably coming. Still, and I cannot stress this enough, these quests are so well written and so emotionally resonant that I'm willing to forgive the formulaic setup. The Bloody Baron's questline earned every minute I spent on it, even if the framing was help me first. I just wish the game had found a few more ways to integrate these incredible side stories without making them feel like mandatory toll booths on the road to finding Ciri. And honestly, the fact that the game's writing is so good that it's able to overcome this repetitive framework, that is impressive all on its own. Geralt arrives in Novigrad and immediately sees witch hunters burning a woman and a Doppler at the stake. The city is chaotic, and the Church of the Eternal Fire's influence is just everywhere. Geralt begins asking around for Triss Marigold, hoping she can help with leads on Ciri. He can track her by following a pickpocket through the street, questioning beggars, or even finding a sewer entrance. All paths eventually lead to her hideout in the Putrid Grove. They head to a warehouse infested with rats. Geralt sets traps and positions incense at 3 points, and when Triss activates it, it works, but surprise, surprise, the guy that hired her double-crossed her and brought witch hunters to her to collect a bounty on her, forcing them into a fight. Geralt and Triss defeat the attackers and they secure the area. With the immediate danger over, they confront Brandon, the merchant who hired Triss. After dealing with him, Triss shares her next lead, an Oniromancer named Kareen Tilly, who might interpret visions connected to Ciri. Geralt goes to a house southeast of Hierarch Square where Kareen was last seen working. At the door, he meets Rudolph, the banker who hired her, and enters to investigate. Inside, on the upper floor, Geralt finds Kareen in a deep, unnatural sleep. She mumbles about a doll and an addict, but cannot be awakened by normal means. Following her clues, Geralt heads to the attic, uses R to clear a blocked doorway, finds a rag doll and a crude drawing of a crib. Taking these, he returns downstairs and places the doll in the crib that has mysteriously appeared. A new drawing on the door shows an oven. Geralt goes to the cellar and examines the oven, where a godling named Sarah reveals herself. She is the one that is causing Kareen's nightmares. Sarah claims the house is her home and was trying to scare people away. Geralt has a choice: make a deal with Sarah and let her stay, or force her out. Letting Sarah stay ends her torment of Kareen. Once Kareen is awake, she invites Geralt to meet her at the Golden Sturgeon Inn west of Hierarch Square, where they talk and she asks Geralt about Ciri. Geralt answers questions about his memories of her, and then Corrine conducts an onirimatic dream. Falling asleep under her guidance, Geralt dreams of Ciri in Novigrad, including seeing her alongside Dandelion, giving him a clearer lead on where to search next. Geralt heads to the Rosemary in Time, a brothel Dandelion inherited from a friend. He expects to find the bard there, but instead he runs into Zoltan Chevet, who has just chased out some vagrants from the building. Moral trouble arrives, and Geralt helps Zoltan fight off another group of drunks and looters before they can talk. Once the brawl ends, Zoltan and Geralt search the ground floor and find Dandelion's planner. It's a notebook listing the women he had been seeing before he disappeared. Zoltan suggests they split the names and ask each woman if she knows anything about Dandelion's plans. Geralt can visit them in any order, and each conversation reveals fragments of Dandelion's last known whereabouts. Vespula is a washerwoman in Far Corners. She recalls Dandelion and says she once saw him at a harbor with a woman. Marabella was a teacher, remembers him studying fungi. And Molly, who works near the Vegelbud estate, explains she hasn't seen him, but mentions a blonde woman he cared about and told her it was his sister. And Rosa von Atre, whom Geralt might spar with as her fencing instructor. She recounts brief social encounters with him and with her twin Edna. They share that Dandelion once questioned them in a graveyard about Margrave Henkel and someone named Calinetta. Each woman adds a piece to the picture of Dandelion's last known days seen. Once Geralt has spoken to all the women on the list, he returns to Zoltan. Zoltan reviews what they've learned and concludes there's one person who might know more: Priscilla, a famous troubadour still performing in Novigrad. They head to the Kingfisher Inn after sundown, where Priscilla is on stage singing. And this moment is just like, this is a video game. After her performance, Priscilla takes Geralt and Zoltan aside and reveals that Dandelion had been planning a daring heist on the crime lord Siggy Reuven before he had disappeared. She says Dandelion stirred up trouble at Horson Jr.'s headquarters and was likely being pursued when he vanished. To learn more about Junior's dealings, Geralt heads to Siggy Reuven's bathhouse north of Hierarch Square to talk to Dijkstra, who is actually Siggy Reuven. There, Geralt finds Dijkstra with other criminal figures, and before the conversation settles, Horson Jr.'s henchmen attack the bathhouse. Geralt fights them off, and afterward, Dijkstra lays out what he knows. Jr. has 3 strongholds in the city: his arena, casino, and hideout, and investigating them might lead to locating him. So, after having our little chat with Dijkstra in the bathhouse, I want to take a moment to talk about something that The Witcher 3 does exceptionally well: reintroducing characters from the books and previous games in a way that works for both longtime fans and complete newcomers. Because this is honestly one of the most difficult balancing acts in any sequel that draws from existing material. And CDPR pulls it off consistently throughout the entire game. Every returning character introduction works on multiple levels depending on what you bring to it. There's always this surface level that gives newcomers everything they need: who this person is, why they matter, what their relationship to Geralt is like, and then there's this deeper level for longtime fans: references to specific events, acknowledgement of shared history, subtext that only makes sense if you know the full backstory, and crucially, accessing that deeper level is completely optional. The game makes the information available through dialogue choices, through environmental details, through codex entries, but it never stops the story to lecture you on the. Let's go back to Dijkstra for a second, because there's a specific detail that exemplifies this approach. In the books, Geralt broke Dijkstra's leg during a confrontation. It's a significant moment in their relationship, and in The Witcher 3, this is referenced. Dijkstra might mention his leg bothering him. There might be a dialogue option where Geralt can bring it up, but it's done very subtly. It's not presented as this just huge dramatic thing that needs to be addressed. It's just a part of their history, acknowledged and moved past, the way real people with complicated pasts might handle an old wound. Book readers get that moment of recognition and appreciation for the continuity being kept, and new players might not even catch the significance, and that's fine. It doesn't hurt the understanding of the scene. This is also where the writing really shines. The dialogue between Geralt and these returning characters is written the way people who would actually know each other talk. There is no, as you know, Bob moments where characters explain things to each other that they both obviously already know just for the audience's benefit. When Geralt talks to Zoltan, they don't just recap their friendship, they just act like friends. When he talks to Dijkstra, they don't explain their complicated history. They just navigate it, and the game trusts you that the relationship dynamics will come in, how these characters interact, and they do. The genius of this system is that it solves the fundamental problem CDPR faced. How do you make the third game in a series that's also a sequel to 8 novels feel accessible to newcomers without alienating the longtime fans who have been following these characters for years? The answer is you write every scene to work perfectly well on its own while rewarding those with deeper knowledge. Another thing I appreciate is how the game handles the passage of time and changing circumstances. Dijkstra isn't where he was in the books. He's been pushed out of power. He's running a bathhouse instead of running Redanian intelligence. Triss's situation in Novigrad is precarious in ways that it wasn't before, and Dandelion has gotten himself into new trouble. The game doesn't just bring these characters back in stasis, it shows how they have been affected by events between the books and previous games and now. For longtime fans, this is fascinating seeing how these characters have evolved and adapted, and for newcomers, it just means that you're meeting them as they are now, which is all you need. The environmental storytelling also plays a huge role in character introduction. Dijkstra's bathhouse tells you so much about who he is and how he operates even before you talk to him. Triss hiding among refugees in Novigrad communicates her current situation immediately, and Dandelion's ownership of a brothel reflects his personality and ambitions. The game uses setting and context to do heavy lifting that exposition would have to do in a less well crafted experience. It's just how consistent this approach is amongst dozens of characters that is what is making The Witcher 3 worthy of just so much praise. Every single returning character from the books or previous games is handled with the same care, whether it's a major player like Dijkstra or Triss, like we've talked about, or just smaller characters who show up for one quest. The game always gives newcomers what they need, just while rewarding longtime fans with more deeper appreciation. And that level of consistency across such a large cast is just truly commendable to CDPR. And let's be real, we have seen how badly this can go. How many sequels have you experienced where returning characters feel like they exist purely for fan service and where their introductions are awkward because they can't decide how much to explain? How many times have you watched a show or movie just stop dead in its tracks to recap previous installments for new viewers while longtime fans just kind of sit there bored? CDPR avoids all these pitfalls by trusting their audience, both types of audiences, to be intelligent enough to get what they need from the context of the scene alone. The other thing this approach does is just maintain momentum because the game isn't stopping to explain everybody's backstories. The narrative keeps moving forward. You're always progressing, always learning new things about the current situation rather than dwelling on the past. The past informs the present, absolutely, but it never overtakes it. This is crucial for pacing and for keeping both newcomer and veteran players engaged. I think this is also why The Witcher 3 has been so successful at bringing new people into the franchise. If the game had been impenetrable without reading the books or playing the previous games, it would have been very niche. But because CDPR put so much work into making every character introduction accessible while still respecting the source material, new players could jump in and feel welcome, while book readers could appreciate all the careful continuity and characters. It's worth noting that this balancing act extends just beyond character introductions. This entire game is structured around this philosophy. Political conflicts, references to past events, the world building itself, all of it is for both audiences. But character reintroduction is where it's most apparent and probably most crucial because characters are what we connect with emotionally in these stories. And if these reintroductions had just been handled poorly, the whole game would suffer no matter how good everything else was. And as we continue through the game, pay attention to how this pattern repeats with other returning characters, whether it's major figures or minor ones. CDPR handles them all with the same care that they show the major players in the story. This is the kind of writing and design that other developers should study because while The Witcher 3 is exceptional in many ways, this particular aspect, making a deeply continuity heavy sequel accessible to newcomers without dumbing it down or boring longtime fans, is something that every franchise sequel struggles with. CDPR cracked the code, and they did it by respecting both their source material and their audience enough to trust that good writing will serve both equally. Now, going back to Geralt tracking down Whoreson Jr., Geralt can tackle Junior's locations in any order. Now, take the arena for instance. He can go there and fight in the arena, or you can just break in with Cleaver's dwarves and just go through defeating all the enemies, searching the area and finding documents, including a mysterious letter. Once Geralt has gathered enough intel from the arena, casino, or Junior's other strongholds, he reports back to Dijkstra. Dijkstra sends Geralt to meet Vernon Roach and the Temerian partisan hideout, and together, Geralt makes his way to Oxenfurt, where he instead meets King Radovid. Radovid reveals Junior's Oxenfurt hideout and asks a favor in return for information. At Junior's hideout in Oxenfurt, Geralt fights past guards and uses a key taken from their corpses to enter Junior's estate. Inside, he clears out more of Junior's henchmen. As we're walking into Junior's hideout, I can't show what's here, but Junior is a severely messed up individual. During the confrontation, Junior tells Geralt about Ciri's visit to him, revealing how Ciri encountered Junior and fled him. In the flashback with Ciri, Ciri and Dandelion recount how Ciri and the Bard had promised Junior a heap of treasure in exchange for his help. When they failed to deliver, Junior kidnapped their friend Dudu, a Doppler, and began torturing him to force them to perform. Ciri doesn't wait. She breaks into Junior's mansion to rescue Dudu herself. Ciri climbs up to the roof of Junior's estate and traverses rooftops to reach a balcony above Junior's room. She drops down, enters through a window, and finds Junior tormenting Dudu. Ciri fights and defeats Junior in direct combat. Junior's allies swarm the hideout, and Ciri must fight her way out through multiple floors of henchmen. Ciri finally gets her way out of the mansion, and the flashback ends. After Ciri's sequence ends and control returns to Geralt, he has a choice: kill Junior or spare his life. But I think we all know what we're gonna do here. Geralt heads back to Dijkstra's bathhouse, and Dijkstra reveals that his underground vault, once filled with gold and valuables, was blown up and treasure stolen. He asks Geralt for help investigating what happened and recovering it, hoping that this will shed light on Dandelion's fate. Geralt follows the tunnel using his Witcher senses to examine key items and fight off drowners along the way. Near the end of the passage, he finds a piece of a bomb, and from the evidence, he deduces that the vault was blown open from the sewer side, confirming how the robbers escaped. Geralt returns to Dijkstra and explains what he found. Back in the bathhouse, Dijkstra sends Geralt to investigate two pools connected to the vault's water system. Using his senses, Geralt examines one of the pools and finds oil on the surface and another bomb part. The clues point to a name, Margrave Henkel, and Dijkstra instructs Geralt to visit Henkel's house for further details. At Henkel's residence, Geralt uses R to open a blocked door and follows tracks through the house that lead to a wine bottle puzzle. By placing a specific bottle in an empty slot on the wine rack, a secret doorway opens. Beyond, Geralt finds letter and bomb components, including a note from Dudu that confirms the robbery and ties it to Dandelion. Geralt and Dijkstra assess the new facts and prepare to confront the witch hunter's outpost where Dandelion is being held. At midnight, Geralt meets Triss at a shrine and they put their plan into motion. Using fake dimeridium shackles, they offer Triss up to the witch hunters to gain an audience with Caleb Menga. What happens next depends on Geralt's choices. Once Geralt learns that Menga has kept Dandelion alive, but only if Menga orders his release will he be released. They eventually go into Triss's torture room, where they find everybody dead, and Triss just kills Menga. They make their escape, but now they know Dandelion is alive, and once outside, Triss ignites the outpost, and Geralt must climb out and break through a brick wall to escape. One of Dijkstra's men leads him to Dijkstra to share what he's learned, and if Geralt asks Menga specifically about Dijkstra's treasure in their conversation, Dijkstra will be pleased and will reward Geralt more generously. If not, Dijkstra is still satisfied with the progress, but expresses displeasure at how Geralt handled the interrogation. Alright, now let's talk about Gwent. I mean, really talk about it, because if I'm being completely honest with you, there have been multiple points in my playthrough of The Witcher 3 where I've just forgotten I'm supposed to be saving the world from an apocalyptic threat because I'm too busy hunting down merchants who might have rare cards. I have ignored main quest, I've put off finding Ciri, I have let the wild hunt wait because someone in a random tavern mentioned that they've got a decent deck and I need to crush them and take their cards. And the beautiful thing is, I don't think I am alone in this. I genuinely believe that there's a non-insignificant portion of The Witcher 3's player base who stuck around for Gwent and considered the whole save your adopted daughter from Wraith Riders thing as just a pleasant bonus activity between card games. Now, I want to start by acknowledging something that might be controversial. I don't think Gwent would be nearly as compelling as a standalone game, and before the Gwent loyalists come for me, hear me out. As a real life card game or even as a dedicated video game experience, Gwent is good. It's fine, but it's not groundbreaking. I have yet to try the actual standalone Gwent game because I just like it within the realm of The Witcher 3, which we'll get into, but I just think that's part of the reason I think it really just only works within the world of The Witcher 3. The mechanics are solid but relatively simple once you understand them, and the strategy has depth, but not endless depth. And if you were just sitting down to play Gwent for hours on with no other context, I think that it would start to feel repetitive after a while. But Gwent doesn't exist in a vacuum, it exists as a minigame within one of the greatest RPGs ever made. In that context, that integration into the larger world and experience is what elevates it from pretty good card game to an obsession inducing masterpiece of side content. Now, let's talk about what makes Gwent work just so brilliantly within The Witcher 3. First and most importantly, it's actually fun to play. This sounds obvious, but you would be surprised how many games include mini games that are just tedious obligations you suffer through for completion's sake. Think about some of the mini games you've encountered in other RPGs. Lock picking, that's just a quick time event. The hacking, that's just a simplified version of something you've seen 1,000 times. The racing that controls like garbage because the game wasn't built for it. Gwent is none of those things. Gwent is a genuinely engaging strategic card game that also serves as a collectible experience. The basic rules are simple enough that you can learn them in a few minutes, but there's enough depth that you can still discover new strategies and combinations dozens of hours in. Each round, you're playing cards to try to get a higher total strength than your opponent. Best 2 out of 3 rounds wins, but the twist is that you have a limited hand and no way to draw more cards between rounds except through specific card abilities, which means you're constantly making these agonizing decisions about whether to commit resources to win the current round or save them for later. Do you go all in on round one and try to force your opponent to waste their good cards? Or do you throw round one entirely to save your strength for rounds two and three? You bait out their special cards early, or do you assume that they're doing the same to you? It's this beautiful back and forth of bluffing and resource management and trying to read your opponent, and it works perfectly. But what really makes Gwent work in the context of The Witcher 3 is just how it's integrated in the world. This isn't just some abstract card game that exists in menus. It's a thing that people in this world actually play. You see NPCs in taverns playing it, you hear characters talk about it, there are professional players in tournaments, and people who take it seriously. It feels real, it feels like part of the culture of the world, and that makes you want to engage with it. When you sit down to play Gwent with someone, it's not breaking immersion, it's deepening it. You're doing something that makes sense for Geralt to do, something that fits naturally into the rhythm of his life as a witcher. And the collecting aspect, because this is where Gwent absolutely shines and where most other minigames fall flat. In The Witcher 3, you collect Gwent cards not just out of fun or completionist sake, but because it's actually useful. Every card you collect makes your deck stronger, gives you more strategic options, and allows you to refine your playstyle. This is in stark contrast to most collectibles in games, which are you just pick up for the sake of completion with no real impact on anything. You know, the type collect 100 feathers scattered around the map. Congratulations, here's an achievement, and nothing else. But with Gwent, every single card matters. Finding a new hero card or a special card genuinely changes how you approach matches. It's meaningful progression that you can feel through a collectible system. Cards are also distributed in a number of ways. Some you might just buy from merchants, which gives you a reason to actually visit and interact with all those vendors that sometimes you might otherwise just ignore. You win some from beating specific opponents, which turns every Gwent player into a mini challenge with a tangible reward. And sometimes you'll just find them in random locations, which encourages exploration and makes stumbling across a house in the middle of nowhere feel rewarding. And you get some from completing quests, which ties to the card collecting into the broader game experience. There's no one way to complete your collection. You have to engage with all aspects of The Witcher 3 to get all the cards of the collectible for The Witcher 3. It's just perfect game design. And really, the most important thing here that I haven't talked about yet is that the game doesn't force Gwent on you. If you genuinely don't enjoy it, you can ignore it entirely and still complete the game just fine. You'll miss out on some quests and some fun interactions, but the game doesn't punish you for not engaging with it. But for those of us who do engage with it, the rewards are very substantial, not just in terms of cards and in game currency, but in terms of overall enjoyment. Gwent provides these little breaks in the action where you can just sit down and play a few matches and relax a bit. It's pacing essentially. It gives you something different to do when you just need a change of pace from combat and questing. Now, I mentioned earlier that I don't think Gwent would be as compelling as a standalone experience, and I want to elaborate on that because it's important to understanding why it works so well here. The strategy in Gwent is good, but it's not infinitely deep. Once you've got a strong deck and you understand the mechanics, you're going to win most, if not all, matches pretty single handedly. The AI opponents aren't playing on some incredibly sophisticated level, they're following patterns and rhythms and algorithms that you can learn and exploit. In a competitive standalone game, this would be a problem. You'd play for a while, master the basic strategies, and then you'd be looking for more complexity that just isn't really there. But in The Witcher 3, that's just perfectly fine. You don't need Gwent to be endlessly complex because it's not the main attraction. It's just a very delightful side dish that complements the main course. It's deep enough to be engaging, but not so deep that it overwhelms or distracts from the rest of the experience. And like, let's just be real, part of the appeal of Gwent is that you can just become ridiculously overpowered at it. By mid game, if you've been collecting cards, you build a deck that crushes most opponents without breaking a sweat, and that feels good. It's a power fantasy within a power fantasy. You're already playing as a legendary monster hunter, and now you're also just the best Gwent player. It's silly and I love it. And I think it just boils down to the ultimate test of a collectible system in a game. Do you actually want to collect the things? Not because you're a completionist and you need to tick the box, but because you genuinely enjoy the process of collecting them. And with Gwent, the answer is just a resounding yes. I want to find all the cards. I want to build the perfect deck. I want to beat every opponent. I want to win the tournament. Not because I feel obligated to, but just because it's fun. Gwent is what every minigame in every RPG should aspire to be: mechanically solid, well integrated into the world, and genuinely fun to engage with. It's not just a distraction or a box to tick, it is a legitimate part of this game's appeal. And it's a feature that enhances the overall experience rather than detracting from it. And it's proof that you can have side content and collectible content that is just as compelling as the main content in the game if you just put forth the effort to make it so. After figuring out where Dijkstra's treasure went and where Junior went, Geralt realizes he needs to find Dudu the Doppler to get leads on Dandelion. Geralt tracks down Priscilla once again at the Kingfisher Inn in Novigrad and explains what he's learned. Priscilla comes up with a plan to lure Dudu out of hiding by putting on a play that will signal to him that it's safe for him to come forward. She writes the script while Geralt names the play and chooses its genre. With the script ready, Geralt takes it to Arena at the theater in the butcher's yard. He recruits ushers at the docks, possibly paying or just by defeating the two strongmen, and can't help a performer troupe called the Puffins by dealing with thugs harassing them. Once the cast and ushers are in place, Geralt chooses who will play the princess and the Doppler. During the play itself, Geralt must deliver a series of lines which you can absolutely butcher. The play always succeeds in drawing out Dudu, who watches from the audience and eventually reveals himself at the end. Backstage, Geralt talks with Dudu and can even have him transform briefly into Ciri. Geralt then explains the plan to rescue Dandelion, and after some convincing, often with Zoltan's help, Dudu reluctantly agrees to impersonate Menga to gain access to the witch hunters. Geralt rendezvous with Zoltan at an ambush site in the outer wilds of Novigrad to intercept a transport moving Dandelion at the order of Menga. When the transport arrives, everything goes wrong, and somebody takes Dandelion on a horse. Geralt mounts Roach and follows Hoofprints northward. The horse prints lead Geralt toward a small hut in the woods, and there, alongside a group of halflings and a dwarf, he learns of a secret entrance through a cellar behind the building. They give him a key and point the way. Geralt opens the cellar, follows the ladder up into the hut, and confronts the lone witch hunter holding Dandelion captive. Once the witch hunter is defeated, Geralt unties Dandelion. Dandelion tells Geralt his last time seeing Ciri. Ciri and Dandelion escape Junior's hideout and find themselves on the run with Junior's men and henchmen in pursuit. The only possible escape route leads them towards Temple Isle, a high fortified area north of Novigrad. They run through the streets, Ciri fights off several of Junior's henchmen, and makes her way toward the gate with Dandelion. Ciri and Dandelion ride uphill toward the Temple of the Eternal Fire, pursued by more of Junior's men. Once near the temple, Ciri dismounts as more enemies, including guards, block the doorway. They must be dealt with before Ciri can enter. Inside the temple grounds, Ciri and Dandelion confront another wave of attackers, and at the climax of the fight, a temple guard shoots a crossbow bolt at Ciri. Dandelion leaps to protect her, but Ciri realizes the danger has grown too great and uses her elder blood to teleport herself away. Teleportation saves her, but leaves Dandelion behind to be captured. So at this point in our journey, we have made our way through the swamps of Velen, navigated the political intrigue and criminal underworld of Novigrad, and experienced several flashbacks showing us Ciri's perspective during her time on the run from the Wild Hunt. And I have to be honest with you, these early Ciri sequences feel like they're not quite living up to the potential of what I feel like they could. Now, before you click off thinking I'm about to trash these sections entirely, let me clarify. I understand what CDPR was going for here, and there are moments where it works, but by and large, it feels like they're really just checking boxes rather than truly enhancing the narrative in meaningful ways. Let's start with what these flashbacks are supposed to accomplish. On a mechanical level, they give you a chance to play as Ciri and get familiar with her incredibly distinct combat style. The blink ability, the speed, the sheer power she wields compared to Geralt. From a narrative standpoint, they're meant to build our connection to Ciri, given we don't really get to spend much time with her in the early game, and we're supposed to care for hunting for her throughout most of the first half of this game, so it just kind of shows us what she's been through and illustrates just how dangerous the Wild Hunt truly is. And on paper, that sounds great. The problem is that in execution, particularly in these Velen and Novigrad sections, they often feel paper thin and occasionally even forced into the narrative in ways that I just don't really quite enjoy. The most egregious example of this has to be the race. You've just had this incredibly emotional, intense quest line with the Baron. You've learned about his abusive past, his complicated relationship with his family, and you're actively working to find both his wife and his daughter. The game has done an excellent job of making you invested in this family's fate, and then suddenly, right toward the end of this search, we flash back to Ciri having a horse race with the Baron, just a friendly little competition, and I know it leads up to something more important, but I have to ask why. Why does he agree to tell us half the information, have us experience this flashback that's really just a relatively mundane horse race, and then only provide the rest of the information later? It feels like CDPR had developed these Ciri gameplay mechanics and was just really determined to use them. The race itself isn't poorly made or anything, but it just serves almost no purpose. Rather, I mean, I guess you could say it just shows the Baron and Ciri kind of getting along, but you could have just done that in a cutscene. And like, let's just be honest, the horse mechanics in Witcher 3 just aren't that great to begin with. We don't really see her struggling with anything or making difficult choices. She's just kind of racing a horse, and it's just filler in a game that I really feel like handles these quests incredibly well. And then we have fleeing the bog, which might just be even more confusing in its terms of its purpose. You play as Ciri as she escapes from the Crone's Bog, and the Wild Hunt shows up to pursue her. Now, this should be pretty terrifying, right? This should be our chance to truly understand the danger she is in, to feel the weight of these spectral riders bearing down on us. But instead, you can literally just sprint away and be done with the entire sequence in literally about 15 seconds. You're not forced into combat, there's no dramatic narrow escape, no moment where you barely make it out by the skin of your teeth. You just run in a straight line and it's over. CDPR wanted to use this as an opportunity to showcase the Wild Hunt's threat, to have us engage with them in Ciri, to have us engage with them as Ciri and understand the power difference. They completely squandered it. And if they didn't want that, then why just include this flashback at all? What does it add to our understanding of Ciri on her journey that couldn't have just been communicated through a cutscene? The Novigrad flashbacks fare slightly better. I'll give them that. Seeing Ciri's time with Dandelion and her relationship with Dudu and her interactions with just them all provide more substance. The sequence where she helps Dudu is genuinely fun, and as well as Junior's boss fight. It's something that I wish the Velen segments had a little bit more of, but here they're just, again, just super short and kind of just don't really fulfill the purpose I think they were put in the game to achieve. But here's the thing, and we'll get to this when we reach the Skellige flashbacks. The Skellige flashbacks are just meatier. They have more weight to them. They show Ciri grappling with real decisions and facing genuine danger that test her character, which makes these earlier flashbacks feel even more like they're just here to introduce us to the mechanic of playing as Ciri before the game actually gives us the good Ciri content. And look, I get it. CDPR is in a difficult position here. They need to make Ciri feel like a real fleshed out character that we care about finding and not just a MacGuffin that Geralt is chasing. They want us to bond with her, to understand her, and to be invested in her safety. And the flashback structure is a genuinely clever way to do this. It's far more engaging than just having NPCs tell us about her, but the execution remains the same. I just don't really feel like they're working. It just feels like they're saying like, "Hey, we developed Ciri, we need to have X number of Ciri gameplay moments," rather than what does the story truly need here? The result is that just some of these flashbacks feel mandatory rather than meaningful, and it's like it's just content created to fill a quota rather than the narrative demanded we play as Ciri at this moment. These flashbacks sometimes just undercut the pacing of Geralt's investigations. You're building momentum, following leads, and getting closer to finding Ciri, and then suddenly you're kind of ripped out to play a sequence that doesn't really feel relevant and isn't really that fun gameplay wise and just kind of feels like a distraction. They answer questions we have, they provide context, they feel like puzzle pieces fall into place, but here in Novigrad and Velen, they sometimes just kind of feel like interruptions. Now, I don't want to be entirely negative here because I do think the concept here is sound, and there are things that these flashbacks do well. Playing as Ciri is mechanically satisfying. She's fast, she's powerful, and her combat feels distinctly different than Geralt's more methodical and slower approach. And seeing Ciri's interactions with various characters and getting a sense of her personality through her dialogue choices and actions, understanding that she's not just powerful, but also incredibly kind. These are valuable insights, especially because earlier we talked about introducing legacy characters for newcomers, and I think the flashbacks do that really well. It's just the gameplay parts of them really fall flat in comparison. And the thing is, I know CDPR can do better because they prove that later in the game with the Skellige flashback. Without spoiling anything for those of you who haven't made it to Skellige yet, those flashbacks have stakes, they have emotional weight, and they reveal important things about Ciri's character. They feel essential rather than optional and meaningful rather than mandatory, which just makes me wonder what happened with these earlier ones. Was it like a time constraint thing? Did they need to introduce Ciri gameplay earlier and they were the best spots they could find? Were these sequences created early in development before they really figured out how to fully integrate them? I don't know, but it just kind of feels like filler in these early parts where they could have just been cutscenes. And I really wish they would have delved more deeper into the gameplay of them because playing a Ciri is really fun and really rewarding. And I think it might have been better if just saved for later in the game, like maybe during the Battle of Kaer Morhen, we actually finally get to play a Ciri and then maybe just have more time in Act 2 and 3 developed to playing as Ciri as her own character rather than just these little short burst in missions. But even though I am critical of these sequences, they do not significantly harm the overall experience. The core strength of Witcher 3's narrative, the investigation of Ciri and what it reveals about Geralt's relationships and the world at large remain entirely compelling, and these flashbacks just kind of feel like speed bumps. And honestly, the fact that these relatively minor sequences are one of my biggest criticisms of the game so far should tell you something about the quality of everything else we have experienced thus far. When your biggest complaints is these good sequences could have been great, you're doing pretty well. After the sequence of Novigrad quests, Geralt's search for Ciri leads him to reuniting with Yennefer in the Skellige Isles, and he must join her there. Geralt heads to the Novigrad docks to find a ship bound for Skellige, but most captains refuse the route because of pirate-infested waters. Eventually, he finds Captain Wolverstone inside the Golden Sturgeon, and he agrees to take Geralt to Skellige for 1,000 crowns. Once aboard, Geralt settles in for the voyage, and his rest is abruptly cut short when pirates attack the ship, forcing him to fight alongside the crew to repel them. The battle ends with the ship crashing against the rocks, and Geralt is knocked unconscious. When he wakes, Geralt finds himself washed up on a beach in Skellige. A man who initially attempts to rob him eventually tells Geralt how to reach Caer Trold, the main settlement on Ard Skellige. Before making his way to Caer Trold, Geralt can explore the shipwreck to the south and recover his 1,000 crowns he paid for passage, along with additional loot and diagrams. At Caer Trold Harbor, Geralt arrives amidst a gathering for a funeral of King Bran, who recently died. Among those present is Yennefer, and the two share a moment where they exchange what they've learned about Ciri's trail so far. Geralt also speaks with Krakon Crate, a powerful Skellige lord, who insists that Geralt attend the king's wake. During the reception, Yennefer pulls Geralt aside and reveals her true purpose. She wants to break into Ermien's laboratory to retrieve the Mask of Ouroboros, an artifact she believes will help in the search of Ciri. Geralt follows her through the castle to reach the laboratory. Inside, they find a room filled with lifelike stuffed animals that spring to life as illusions. Geralt defeats the hallucinations and proceeds deeper into the laboratory. Using his Witcher senses in the next chamber, Geralt locates a mead chalice, which he places into the hand of a statue to reveal a secret passage. Beyond it, he and Yennefer discover the mask, but it's guarded by an earth elemental. They must defeat the elemental to claim the mask. After the battle, a cloud of poisonous gas fills the room, closing the normal exit. To escape, Yennefer triggers a portal. They emerge back in Yennefer's room and have a quiet moment to themselves. Once they return, the wait continues, and Geralt talks with Croc, who agrees to help Geralt and Yennefer pursue their next steps in the search for Ciri. The next day, Geralt and Yennefer travel to the site of a magic cataclysm in Ard Skellige. It was a forest warped by tremendous force. Yennefer suspects that Ciri is tied to the event, and she wants to use the mask they recovered to uncover what happened. At the Druid camp, they find Ermien arguing with Yennefer about the mask and its dangers. While they talk, Yennefer slips into the forest and uses the mask on her own. Geralt follows and finds Yennefer engaged in battle with a pair of foglets. He helps her kill them, and she explains the mask can reveal echoes of the past at places where magic was exceptionally strong. She gives Geralt the mask and asks him to use it and mark locations as they move through the woods. Together, they visit multiple points where motes of energy float in the air, and at each, Geralt puts on the mask and witnesses visions of the past events involving Ciri, glimpsing her movements and companions escaping through portals and fighting enemies, all connected to the cataclysm that scarred the land. After the final vision, the weather begins to clear, and Ermien rejoins them. Together, they realize there is one more clue to uncover: the body of someone seen in the visions. Yennefer uses her magic to lift a fallen tree, revealing the corpse of a wild hunt rider buried beneath it. Ermien explains that sightings of the hunt were reported weeks after the explosion, now pointing towards Hindarsfjall. Geralt and Yennefer travel to Hindarsfjall after using the Mask of Ouroboros, and from there they head to the village of Lofoten in search of signs of Ciri. What they find instead is devastation. The village has been completely destroyed by the wild hunt, and the survivors confirm Ciri was there shortly before the attack. No one in the village knows where she went, but they point to a man only known as Craven, who had behaved disgracefully during the hunt's assault and was shunned by the community. The villagers say Craven then set out to redeem himself by defeating the monster in Freya's garden and never returned. Geralt follows Yennefer from the village towards the garden on Lofoten. When they reach the entrance to Freya's garden, a werewolf-like creature called Morkvarg stands on the other side of the locked gate. Geralt and Yennefer enter the garden, tracking Craven's trail. Using his Witcher senses, Geralt follows Craven's bloodied footprints and clues through the overgrown garden into the lower section. Geralt proceeds further into the ruins beneath the garden, and eventually finding Craven's body, mortally wounded and long dead, the final trace of his attempt to redeem himself against the threat hidden in the garden. Yennefer uses necromancy to briefly reanimate his spirit and draw out what he knows. From the corpse's memories, they learn about Ciri's path through Skellige. Here you take control of Ciri as she wakes in Lofoten, tended by a young Skellige hunter named Skjall and his family after escaping the wild hunt. She's exhausted, bloodied, and trying to make sense of where she is and how she got there. Skjall and his sister Astrid help her recover, and she follows Astrid to a sauna to warm up. Once she's clothed again, Ciri meets Skjall in the stable. Their conversation is cut short by the arrival of the wild hunt warriors and hounds. Ciri tries to stand her ground and fight, but the enemies keep coming until Skjall shouts for her to run for horses. She mounts, and they flee through the ruined village. Skjall and Ciri ride toward drowned dead rock, dodging packs of wild hunt hounds and warriors. The attack never fully stops, and Ciri must focus on escaping. When they reach the rock, Skjall draws the attention of the riders chasing Ciri so she can reach a waiting boat and escape. As Ciri tries to persuade her companion waiting by the boat to help Skjall, the riders close in. The companion incapacitates Ciri with a spell and loads her into the boat, disappearing into the thick sea fog. Skjall is left behind, gravely wounded by the hunt's assault, but he fights through the pain to drag himself onto the shore near the very same boat. Lying there, unconscious, he hears the cries of a strange, ugly creature beside the vessel. Remember way back in Novigrad when we talked about how the early Ciri flashbacks kind of felt underutilized? how the race with the Baron seemed pointless and fleeing the bog was just over in 15 seconds. Well, Skellige is where CDPR finally figured out what these sequences were supposed to be all along. The difference is pretty immediately apparent, where the Velen flashbacks felt like fillers. The Skellige ones give us an actual story. Ciri washes up on a beach, meets Skjall, and for the first time in these flashbacks, we're watching her really form a genuine human connection with someone and have meaningful dialogue options. This isn't just gameplay for the sake of using Ciri, it's actual character development. And here's what makes it work. It's emotional stakes. When you play through Ciri's time with Skjall, you're seeing more vulnerability, her exhaustion from running, and her desperate need for normalcy. Those moments with Skjall don't really feel like filler, they feel like actual joy that Ciri is able to experience for the first time that we have seen. The Wild Hunt's attack on Lofoten is everything fleeing the bog should have been. You're not just running away in a straight line for 15 seconds. You're actually fighting them, protecting villagers, and feeling the weight of Ciri's power and her limitations and what danger she can bring onto just innocent people if she happens to just be nearby. This is the threat that Velen kind of completely fumbled for me. But what really elevates these flashbacks is how they tie into Geralt's investigation. When you're playing as Geralt, talking to Skelligers, you're getting this fragmented story where everyone is either lying or just misremembering, where Skjall has been branded a coward. Then you play the flashbacks and you know the truth. He was brave, he protected Ciri, and he died because of her. That gap between what the villagers believe and what actually happened creates this painful moment that the earlier flashbacks never really got to attempt. And yeah, the Novigrad flashbacks, like I said, were better, but these Skellige ones are just completely next level compared to the past two. And there is just a complete character arc contained within these flashbacks, and it's a story that genuinely benefits from being played rather than just being told in a cutscene, unlike I feel like earlier ones could have just been cutscene. And when you realize that Craven's body is actually Skjall's and why he was shunned, it hits harder knowing what he went through for Ciri. Like I said, the most frustrating thing is that they could have done this all along. And the Skellige flashbacks prove the mechanic works when given proper narrative and emotional stakes. It makes the Velen ones just feel even more like wasted potential. So now we have traveled through all major regions of The Witcher 3's map in search of Ciri, the war-torn swamps of Velen, the dense urban sprawl of Novigrad, and the wild islands of Skellige. And before we move forward with retrieving Uma and progressing toward the end game, I want to take a step back and talk about something that I think is absolutely fundamental to understanding, again, why Witcher 3 works as well as it does. These three regions aren't just different locations with different aesthetics. They are fundamentally different RPG experiences that each offer their own tone, gameplay philosophy, quest design approach, and focus. It almost feels like CDPR made three separate games and then stitched them together into one cohesive whole, and somehow it all works perfectly. Most open world RPGs give you variety through different biomes. You've got your forest area, your snow area, your desert area, whatever, but it's just cosmetic variety. The gameplay stays the same, the quest design is the same, and you're just doing the same activities in different colored environments. What The Witcher 3 does with Velen, Novigrad, and Skellige is create genuine structure and mechanical variety. These aren't just different looking places, they're different type of game experiences that require different approaches and appeal to different player preferences. I know plenty of my friends who prefer Skellige and some prefer Novigrad. Me personally, the open swamps of Velen. It's all up to personal preference because of how different the gameplay experience is in each of these different locations. Let's start with Velen because that's where most of us begin our journey after White Orchard. Velen is rural, isolated, and absolutely drenched in despair. This is a land that has been devastated by war, where burned out villages dot the landscape and where refugees huddle in camps with no hope of returning home. The color palette is very muted, browns and grays and greens from the swamps. The weather is frequently overcast or raining, and even the music reinforces this atmosphere. It's these long, droning strings that make you feel small and alone in a vast, hostile world. Velen's quests are intimate, personal, and just tragic. The Bloody Baron quest line perfectly encapsulates what Velen is about. It's a small-scale story about a broken family, about abuse, alcoholism, and regret, about people making terrible choices and drowning in the consequences. And yes, there are monsters and magic involved, but at its core, it is a deeply human story. The crones just aren't random boss monsters, they are woven into the land itself. They're manifestations of Velen's corruption and suffering. They represent these dark bargains people make when they're desperate and have nowhere else to turn. Every quest in Velen carries the weight and tragedy and consequence, and you're not solving problems so much as dealing with the aftermath of problems that have already destroyed lives. The people you meet are victims or survivors broken by war and hardship, and they're just trying to make it another day. And most of the time in Velen, you're spending most of your time in the wilderness, riding roach through forests and swamps, investigating monster nests and abandoned sites, and the points of interest are spread far apart, encouraging exploration but also emphasizing isolation. When you find a place of power or hidden treasure, it feels earned because you've traveled through hostile terrain to reach it. There's this constant sense of danger lurking just off the path, of a world that's gone fundamentally wrong and is just trying to kill you at every single opportunity. Velen's landscapes are dominated by flat swamps, hills, wide open skies that emphasize just this vastness and emptiness. And the few structures that exist are low, scattered small villages, isolated huts, the Baron's fortress standing as one of the few significant vertical elements, and everything about the design makes you feel exposed and vulnerable. Then we get to Novigrad, and the shift when you enter the city is pretty dramatic, where Velen is just this rural and spread out. Novigrad is very dense and urban. Velen is quiet, isolated, and Novigrad is claustrophobic and crowded. Suddenly, you're navigating narrow streets packed with NPCs, hearing merchants hawking their wares, seeing street performers and beggars and guards and criminals all occupying the same chaotic space. The color palette shifts, there's more variety, more life, even if much of that life is just filtered through grime and poverty. The architecture here is just these tall buildings creating canyon like streets, and it all feels aggressively lived in a way that Velen's scattered settlements never could. The Velen quest design was about personal trilogy and horrors. Novigrad is kind of more about intrigue, politics, and urban crime. You're dealing with criminal organizations, spies, informants, and complex webs of allegiance and betrayal. The quests here are investigation and social maneuvering rather than exploration and monster hunting. The entire Dandelion quest chain, for example, you're not tracking someone through the woods, you're interviewing ex girlfriends, dealing with the Doppler, putting on a play, navigating the city's criminal underworld. The Triss quest line has you infiltrating high society parties, smuggling mages, dealing with religious extremism, and political persecution. These are fundamentally different types of quests than anything Velen offered. The gameplay loop here changes entirely. In Velen, you're constantly on roach, covering vast distances between objectives, and in Novigrad, you're on foot most of the time, navigating urban terrain where your horse would just be an impediment. The points of interest shift from monster nests and hidden caches to shops, taverns, and quest givers. Combat becomes less frequent, and you're not fighting random encounters on wilderness roads because there are no wilderness roads. It's just streets full of guards. And when combat does happen, it just feels a little bit more structured and kind of jumps out at you more. And the supernatural parts manifest differently in each region too. In Velen, supernatural feels ancient and rooted more in the land itself. The crones here have existed for what feels like forever, and they're part of Velen's identity. The ladies of the wood, the Leshen, the various spirits, they all feel like expressions of the land and folkloric entries from fairy tales and old warnings. In Novigrad, the supernatural must hide. This is a city gripped by religious extremism where magic can get you burned at the stake. So magical elements like Triss's abilities, the Doppler, enchanted items, they operate in secret and underground. The horror isn't primal fear of the unknown, more civilized terror like persecution and witch hunt. And then we arrive in Skellige and everything changes again. Skellige feels like a response to both previous regions, taking elements from each while establishing its own distinct identity. Velen was horizontal, Novigrad was a little bit more vertical, and Skellige is just vast. These dramatic cliffs rising from stormy seas, mountains dominating the skyline. The landscape here is defined by these vertical changes. The weather is harsh and ever present in a way that neither previous region managed. But what really sets Skellige apart is more of a cultural identity. Velen and Novigrad were both part of the same general Northern Kingdom's culture, just rural versus urban. Skellige is different. These are islanders with their own customs, their own beliefs, their own social structures, and the Viking inspired culture permeates everything: the long houses, the sailing, the emphasis on honor and strength, the funerals, the relationship with the sea. This isn't just aesthetic window dressing, it fundamentally affects how the quests here are structured and what kind of stories the region here tells compared to the ones in Velen and Novigrad. The Skellige quests are more about honor, tradition, and the clash between old ways and new realities. The entire quest line around helping Ceres or Hjalmar become ruler of Skellige is about understanding their culture and choosing which vision of the future you want to support. Do you help Ceres, who represent wisdom and diplomacy, or Hjalmar, who represents traditional warrior values? Neither is presented as clearly right or wrong. They're just different approaches to leadership, each with merits and drawbacks. And this is a more political, more nuanced type of choice than Velen offer, but it's more grounded in a cultural understanding in a way that Novigrad's wasn't. And unlike Velen's pure wildness or Novigrad's dense urban city, Skellige is more about navigational challenges. The islands are separated by water, so sailing becomes a major mechanic, but it's not just about getting from point A to point B. The seas are dangerous, they're full of sirens and pirates and hostile weather. The act of traveling becomes engaging in its own unique right here, which is different from Velen, where it was mostly just on horse. Skellige brings back the sense of discovery that you had in Velen, but with a different flavor. You're finding smugglers' caches, hidden caves, ancient ruins. There's treasure here, real treasure, and not just scraps of civilization collapse. It makes exploration here feel rewarding in a different way than Velen and Novigrad had. These three regions work together to create a complete experience because that is just what's truly brilliant about this design. If the entire game had been Velen's tone and structure, it would have just been unbearably bleak. That level of tragedy sustained for 100 plus hours would be exhausting to the point of being almost unplayable, and if it had been all of Novigrad's urban intrigue, it would have been disconnected from that Witcher fantasy of being out on the trail hunting monsters. If it had all been Skellige's honor and culture and dramatic landscapes, it might have just felt too romanticized and distant from what's going on the actual continent. But by giving us all three, CDPR creates this perfect emotional and gameplay balance. Velen breaks you down, it's heavy, and Novigrad offers a different kind of engagement, which is still serious, still dark, but with more variety in its tone. And then Skellige provides something like catharsis. It's comforting to be here, to be with more legacy characters that treat Geralt with warmth in a way that Velen and Novigrad didn't. So they're not just different locations, they're just different philosophies of game design and different approaches to storytelling and different answers to questions of what an RPG can be. And the fact that all three work and they're all memorable and impactful and worth experiencing, that's just what makes The Witcher not just a great game, but a landmark achievement in gaming as a whole. This is the game's design in its absolute finest. It is ambitious, thoughtful, varied, and executed with constant excellence across wildly different approaches. Geralt's search for Ciri has taken him across Velen, Novigrad, and Skellige. Now everything points back toward a strange figure called Uma. Remember, I told you to remember Uma earlier, so you should. It's a cursed creature whose trail is tied to Ciri's last known movements. Uma is found at Crow's Perch, where the Baron's men have been keeping him as a jester. Geralt goes to the sergeant and tells him he's taking Uma. At the stables, he speaks with the stable master and secures Uma, and they set off towards Kaer Morhen. Nilfgaardian soldiers intercept him, and he's brought before the Emperor once again, who is impatient for news about his daughter. Geralt convinces him that Uma could help locate Ciri. Emir begrudgingly accepts this answer and hands over part of the reward he promised. Yennefer appears and tells Geralt Uma is key to lifting a curse that may reveal where Ciri is hiding. Geralt and Uma head off for Kaer Morhen, the Witcher stronghold. Vesemir greets them and explains their next steps. Uma isn't simply ugly, he's cursed, and breaking that curse will help unlock the next stage of the search. Geralt meets with Yennefer, who is frustrated because her megascope isn't working properly. She suspects something nearby is interfering with magic and asks Geralt for help. Geralt takes the device Yennefer gives him and follows its signal down into the main hall. The device leads him towards Vesemir and Uma, but the disturbance isn't coming from Uma or his cage. Instead, the signal gets strongest near a stack of crates beside Uma. Examining the crates reveal that they're filled with dimeridium bombs that were left there, the source of the interference. Geralt returns upstairs and reports to Yennefer that the disturbance has been eliminated. With the disruption gone, the megascope begins functioning correctly, allowing Yennefer to make her long-planned contact with another sorceress to seek advice on Uma's curse. During this, she and Geralt have a conversation with Ida, which provides deeper insight into Uma's condition. Yennefer then sends Geralt to help Eskel track down a forktail, a draconid she needs ingredients from. Geralt immediately sets out from Kaer gates and uses his Witcher senses to find Eskel's tracks in the trail of his horse. Following the footprints leads to the horse and nearby goat tracks, which Geralt then follows by scent towards a meadow where Eskel emerges and greets him. Their conversation is cut short when the forked tail appears. Geralt and Eskel damage the forked tail, though it flees uphill, leaving a trail of blood. Geralt trails the wounded beast using his senses, which leads him to a cave entrance. Inside the cave, they find the forked tail yet again and finish the hunt. Geralt then seeks out Lambert in the keep and learns that he's been tasked with preparing a phylactery for use in breaking Uma's curse. Lambert wants Geralt to come with him to fill the phylactery with energy at a place called the Circle of Elements. Geralt and Lambert set out together and quickly run into danger. As they run across the ruined countryside, harpies attack from above. They push on, eventually reaching a pond where they must fight through drowners. The two of them then sail across the water, then drop into a cave entrance on the far shore. Deeper in the ruins, they encounter a massive troll called Old Speartip. Geralt avoids him by sneaking by. Outside, yet again, the path climbs into the mountains where rock trolls block the way. Lambert and Geralt can attempt a peaceful resolution by leaving their swords behind. At the Circle of Elements, Geralt and Lambert work together to light torches and place the phylactery on an altar, filling it with natural magical energy. Vesemir, Yennefer, Eskel, and Lambert are in the main hall talking about everything that has happened. Once the group settles in, the drinking and storytelling begin. Yennefer explains her plans for the next phase of saving Uma, which involves submitting him to the trial of the grasses, which is this incredibly invasive procedure which is used to convert boys into witchers, and it's incredibly painful. Geralt then wakes up as everyone is gathered around Uma. Yennefer explained the witchers have failed to lift the curse by normal means, and it's time for the trial of the grasses, the same process witchers themselves endure to gain their abilities. Yennefer begins the ritual to cure Uma. She administers the concoctions one by one, and Uma convulses violently under the effects. Once the trial finishes, Uma's curse breaks and his true form is revealed. He is Avallac'h, an elven sage who has been linked to Ciri's journey and escaped the wild hunt with her. Avallac'h speaks with Geralt and Yennefer, providing a magic firefly, a glowing guide that will light the way to the Isle of Mists, where Ciri is believed to be hidden. He also warns them of the dangers that await her as soon as she leaves that sanctuary and the hunt resumes their pursuit. Knowing the danger, Geralt then decides to go get Ciri, but first stops along the way in Velen, Novigrad, and Skellige to recruit allies that he has gained along the way for the upcoming battle with the Wild Hunt. Heading to Novigrad, he finds Zoltan, who will agree to help no matter what. Then he seeks out Vernon Roche and Vess. Geralt then travels to Skellige. Ermion agrees to help and will join the defense. Saris won't personally lead the Isles, but if Geralt helped her, she will send her best warriors, notably Hjalmar, if he's not already pledged. Geralt then also talks to Croc and Crate. Croc cannot personally accompany Geralt to the battle, but if he has assisted his children in their quest, he will reward him with Winter's Blade, a relic sword as a token of respect. Geralt then gets on a boat and sails toward the heavy fog off the coast of Undvik. As he nears the point marked by the firefly, mist rolls in around his vessel, and the magical light begins to lead the way through dangerous waters dotted with rocks and shipwrecks. Following the firefly across the sea, Geralt eventually reaches the fog-shrouded shore of the Isle of Mists. Once ashore, Geralt follows the firefly inland. The misty island is hostile. Foglets and harpies attack as he pushes toward a lone hut on a hillside where voices can be heard inside. Inside is a group of terrified dwarves, and they tell Geralt that 3 of their friends, Ivo, Gaspard, and Ferenc, went missing while exploring the island. They'll only let Geralt in after he brings back news of their fate. Ivo is found high on a rock and slips to his death trying to come down. Ferenc already lies dead near a fiend's lair, and Gaspard is asleep atop a lighthouse. Geralt wakes and escorts him back to the hut, keeping him conscious as monsters attack along the way. Back at the hut, the dwarves reveal that Ciri is inside, but she's in a death-like slumber and seemingly lifeless. Geralt goes in and finds her lying motionless, and proceeds with one of the most emotional scenes in the game. Overcome with emotion, he embraces her, and at that moment, the magical firefly flies into her, breaking the spell and waking Ciri. They spend some time recounting their journeys and just conversing. Their reunion is cut short when the Wild Hunt arrives and attacks the island to capture Ciri yet again. With no safe path by land, Ciri uses her powers to teleport them both away, taking them back to Kaer Morhen. Inside the keep, Geralt meets with Vesemir, Yennefer, Triss, and everybody he's recruited, ready to stand with Ciri. Together, they discuss defense plans and how to fortify the fortress for the inevitable assault. Soon, the forces of the Wild Hunt descend on Kaer Morhen. Outside the walls, Geralt uses Dimeridium bombs to shut down the Hunt's 3 magical portals in the woods, fighting hounds and warriors of the Wild Hunt as he works. Meanwhile, defenders struggle across the battlefield, and portals continue to open near the keep. As the Hunt presses its attack, Geralt fights to keep the defenders alive. He closes portals around the courtyard, joins Triss on the battlements to stop waves of enemy, and helps secure the main gate by activating levers to close it behind him and the others. The battle surges back and forth as more Hunt warriors and spectral hounds assault the stronghold. At one point, the defenders are overwhelmed. The Hunt's magic freezes the courtyard, and Imlareth personally enters the fight. In the chaos, Vesemir is killed by Imlareth's hand, and Ciri, shattered by the loss of the man she viewed as family, unleashes a raw, uncontrolled surge of power and rage. Her scream of elder blood energy blasts the Hunt's forces and forces them into a retreat. Only the exhausted survivors remained, wounded, shaken, and having bought precious time. Allies gather for Vesemir's funeral, and Ciri, deeply affected by his death, takes his wolf medallion before moving forward. The defeat of the Hunt at the walls of Kaer Morhen is a temporary victory. The Wild Hunt has been driven back, but the cost has been great, and the war is far from over. Now, way back in White Orchard, I talked about how combat in The Witcher 3 gets a lot of flack online, but I thought, it's perfectly serviceable. It's maybe a 7 out of 10 compared to the 11 out of 10 quests and dialogue, and I also mentioned that the combat gets better the further into the game you progress. Well, now we're at a point where you should have a properly developed build, access to superior gear, and a full arsenal of potions and oils, and enough skill points invested to actually have some synergy going. So I want to revisit combat now that you've experienced it in its more complete form and talk about whether it actually delivers on the promise of getting better or if the cracks in the combat started to show a little more. Let's start with the positive. The combat at this stage of the game is significantly more varied and tactical than it was in the early game. Back in White Orchard, you were basically just light attacking and maybe throwing out the occasional Igni or Gwen and calling it a day. You didn't have the tools or the build diversity to really approach fights in a different way. But now with skill points and different gear sets, you've got options. If you've invested in the combat tree, you're probably doing some serious damage with your sword attacks, and you've got abilities that let you do cool stuff like whirl through groups of enemies or use Ren to delete single targets. If you went signs, you're probably melting faces with upgraded Igni or crowd controlling with Ard, and Gwen has become either your best friend or a crutch depending on how you look at it. We'll get into that. If you went alchemy, you're probably running around with decoctions that fundamentally change how you play, superior oils that make your damage spike against specific enemy types, and bombs that actually contribute. The build diversity is genuinely good. The game gives you enough flexibility that 2 players at this point in the game can have very different combat experiences based on how they've spec'd. A heavily combat-focused Geralt plays nothing like a science-focused, and an alchemy build is just completely different altogether. That is exactly what you want from an RPG combat system. The preparation aspect has come into its own by now. Early game, oils and potions felt kind of optional, nice to have, but not necessary. But at this stage, especially if you're playing on the higher difficulty, preparation actually matters. Going into a tough contract without the right oil on your sword and without relevant potions active, and without having read the bestiary entry to know the monster's weakness, that sometimes can get you killed. And when it works, when you've done your homework and prepared properly and the fight goes smoothly because of it, it feels great. It feels like you're actually playing as a professional monster hunter who knows what he's doing. The monster variety has also improved significantly. Now, obviously, the skeleton of the combat is the same, but they introduce new moves and you're using different oils and signs to take them down. But, and this is a big but, a lot of the fundamental issues with combat are still present, and in some ways, they do become more apparent the longer you play. Let's talk about the human combat first, because honestly, it is just the weakest part of the system. Fighting groups of human enemies, which you do a lot in this game, basically never evolves beyond dodge around, hit them a few times, dodge again, and repeat. The enemies don't get more interesting patterns, they don't require different tactics, they just get more health and do more damage. And by this point in the game, human combat encounters are pretty much solved. You know exactly how to handle them, and doing it for the 100th time isn't as engaging as it once was. It's pretty much just going through the motions. And here's where Quen becomes a problem. I said back in White Orchard that I had a lot to say about Quen, and now's the time. Quen is absolutely busted. It trivializes so much of the combat because it gives you a free hit. And if you've invested in the sign tree, it can heal you when it absorbs damage. The optimal strategy for a huge portion of encounters becomes put up Quen and attack until it breaks, dodge away, put up Quen again, and repeat. It's safe, but it's just boring as hell. Now, you could argue that that is a player's problem. Nobody is forcing you to use Quen, and if you think it makes combat too easy, just don't use it. And that's a completely fair point. But I also think it's a design problem when one option is just so clearly superior that not using it feels like you're just handicapping yourself for no reason other than personal preference. The game should encourage build diversity and tactical variety, and not create such a dominant strategy that it overshadows everything else in the game. The camera and lock-on system also continue to be issues. Fighting in tight spaces is a mess. The camera still freaks out near walls, and the lock-on is inconsistent to where I just don't even use it at all. I don't really find it to be a useful feature in any part of the game. And these aren't game-breaking problems, but they're persistent annoyances that never get fixed throughout the entire length of the game. And enemy design is also kind of a mixed bag. Yeah, the different monster types have different patterns, but a lot of them still boil down to dodge their attack, hit them a few times, and repeat. The really good monster fights, like some of the boss encounters, require you to actually think about positioning, using signs strategically, about when to be aggressive and when to back off. But for every good monster fight, there are just about three or four that are just damage sponges with basic attacks. It's serviceable for the game and it's something to do, but it's not the most exciting part of the game. The question I keep coming back to is, does combat get better as you progress, or do you just get better tools to deal with combat that is just fundamentally the same? And I think the answer is like a bit of both. The build diversity, the preparation elements, the monster variety, these things do improve the combat experience compared to the early game. But the core loop of dodge, attack, dodge, and the issues with human encounters, the camera problems, the dominant quench strategy, these things never really go away. I still don't think the combat is bad. It's functional, it gets the job done. And when you're fighting an interesting monster that requires you to use your full toolkit, it can actually be really fun. The problem is it's surrounded by everything else this game does exceptionally well that it suffers in comparison. And if this exact combat system was in a game with worse writing, worse quests, and a less interesting world, we'd probably think it was fine. But when you're comparing it to the Bloody Baron quest line or finding Ciri, it just doesn't really compare. And like I said, I think there have been improvements. Quick casting is genuinely the better system, but it still doesn't fix the core issues with the combat. Now, is combat bad enough to diminish the overall experience? I really don't think so. It's just the weakest link in the chain, and I really hope for The Witcher 4 they really dial in on making the combat meaningful, and if you're playing on like harder difficulties, for it to actually be hard, because I haven't really talked about difficulties yet, but Death March, it shouldn't really have that name. Really, the only thing that's difficult in it is the food problem, which you can solve by just simply using the skill that makes food last 20 minutes. Because even in that, you don't really need to prepare. Yes, it makes things easier if you bring the right oils and stuff in, but you'll be completely fine using the same strategy that you use in the other difficulties. And I hope for like Quen, I hope they make it to where it's more like the active shield in this, where you have to hold it open rather than just being active all the time. Just some way to balance it around the game to where it isn't such a dominant thing to use, but can still be useful. And as you progress through the rest of the game, you'll probably settle into whatever combat approach feels best for your playstyle. Maybe you lean super hard in Quen and potions and you just want to get through fights efficiently, or maybe you challenge yourself to use different signs and approaches to keep things fresh. The game supports all approaches reasonably well. It's just, like I said, some of them skew towards the Quen side a little more than I would like. Heading back to Geralt, we find him still at Kaer Morhen after the funeral for Vesemir. Avallac'h and Yennefer talk with him and Ciri about what to do next. Ciri is frustrated. She's been training to control her powers, but the outbursts still frighten her. Geralt has a moment with her where he takes a snowball to fight her to lift her spirits, The snowball fight loosens her mood and gives her a bit of joy before the road ahead. These choices lead to a hidden score that influences Ciri's fate later. Once Ciri is feeling steadier, she wakes Geralt before dawn, ready to move on. She's learned that Imlereth will soon be at a witch's sabbath on Bald Mountain and wants to go straight for revenge. Geralt and Ciri depart for Velen and begin the road toward Bald Mountain. At the base of the mountain, they encounter peasants gathered for the Crone's gathering. Higher up the path, Geralt and Ciri meet with Johnny, the Godling again. Ahead, an old blind woman decides who is allowed to climb further. She tells Ciri she is chosen, but Geralt must prove himself first. She tosses a coin into an underwater cavern, and Geralt uses his senses to track it down. Once the coin is shown, an assistant leads them up the mountain. Above them, the gatekeeper blocks the path. Ciri can pass easily, but when Geralt shows the coin, the gatekeeper attacks. After defeating him, Geralt and Ciri decide who will tackle which of their targets. Ciri will face the three crones in the roots, while Geralt will pursue Imlereth. Following Ciri inside the crone's lair, she must take on all three crones in one of the most difficult boss fights in the game. Switching over to Geralt, Geralt then ascends to the peak of Bald Mountain, where he confronts Imlereth, the Wild Hunt general responsible for Vesemir's death. The fight is long, brutal. Imlereth teleports. He wields a massive mace and shrouds himself in frost. This is by far the best boss fight in the game. This is the only one that I would say on Death March I had to do a multitude of times and actually learn his attacks, because the one teleporting attack, I just could not get it down for the life of me in my initial playthrough. Once Imlereth is defeated and Ciri reunites with Geralt, they descend Bald Mountain together on their way to Novigrad. Once they reach Novigrad, the first thing Geralt does is Geralt finds Triss upstairs at Dandelion's tavern. She's furious with him for how the hunt for Ciri went and blames him for putting her in danger. Triss explains she's been trying to find Philippa Eilhart, one of the few powerful sorceresses whose help could be crucial in the coming fight. Triss tells Geralt that Philippa was transformed into an owl by a protective spell and later lost by Zoltan as a pet. Philippa ended up in the hands of Dijkstra, who imprisoned her in his bathhouse. Heading to Dijkstra's bathhouse, Geralt and Triss approach and they hear an explosion. Philippa is already loose inside and tearing the place apart with uncontrolled magic. Triss stays at the entrance while Geralt makes his way in. Inside, Philippa has enslaved Dijkstra's men with her magic. Geralt fights them as he digs deeper, eventually entering a sewer area where he confronts Bart the troll. Geralt convinces Bart to let him pass without a fight by saying he wants to help Philippa. Pushing on, Geralt reaches a large chamber where Philippa summons a fire elemental to attack. After Geralt defeats the elemental, Geralt climbs up the stairs and sneaks up behind Philippa. When Geralt reaches her, he pins Philippa down and finally calms her down. On the way out, Dijkstra blocks their path and Geralt has two options. He can either fight his way out or take a diplomatic line telling Dijkstra about what the Emperor is after. Then Geralt goes to meet Yennefer and crippled Kates in Novigrad. She tells him that Margarita, an old friend and powerful sorceress, has been captured by witch hunters and is being held in a prison in Oxenfurt. A man who once escaped the prison arrives at crippled Kates, but when Geralt tries to question him, he runs. Geralt chases him through the street. Yennefer teleports in to end the chase for him. Once caught, he explains how the guards like to drink on duty and mentions a way into the prison through the Oxenfurt sewers. Geralt meets Yennefer at the bridge into Oxenfurt, and together they go to a well that leads into ancient elven ruins beneath the city. Yennefer gives Geralt a magic trinket that will allow her to teleport in when he finds Margarita. Geralt drops into the ruins and begins exploring using his Witcher senses. He finds a broken mechanism that blocks the path forward and must track down the missing part. When the lever is reassembled and the stone door opens, Geralt proceeds deeper until he encounters a breakable wall. After breaking it, it reveals a passage into the Oxenfurt sewers. There, he fights drowners, ghouls, and a necrophage before eventually finding a way into the prison itself. Inside the prison, Geralt fights through rooms full of witch hunters to reach Margarita's cell block, who tells him that he must locate the warden's office in the courtyard and defeat the warden to get the cell key from his body. Geralt fights through the courtyard, eventually killing the warden, and with the cell key in hand, he returns to Margarita's cell, unlocks it, and uses the magic trinket so Yennefer can teleport her out. With Margarita safe, Yennefer leaves by portal, and Geralt must find his own way out of the prison. Geralt then meets Ciri in Novigrad, and she tells him that she wants to repay old friends and settle some unfinished business. Her first stop is Junior, but what happens here depends on how Junior ended. In this case, Geralt killed Junior. Ciri leads him to his old hideout on Temple Isle where two of Junior's men block the door. As they fight, Ciri yells for Geralt to watch out. Suddenly, the two guards stop the fight and say they have been waiting for Geralt. Inside, they discover that Dudu has actually been operating as Junior discreetly and running the operation now legally. Ciri then leads Geralt to the Golden Sturgeon to help one of her friends, B, who's being harassed by thugs. B and Ciri catch up before they move on. From there, they travel east to Far Corners and arrive at a traveling troops camp where Ciri reconnects with the performers who once helped her. At the camp, Ciri and the troop talk, and one of the members returns saying the caravan can't buy horses for their journey. They must steal them if they want to leave quickly. Geralt decides to help them, and at the stables, Geralt and Ciri have to find a way inside without waking up a sleeping guard. Quietly climbing and grabbing the stable key off a table, they then open the doors and the horses are free. Geralt then speaks with Avallac'h and Novigrad. The sage has a plan to weaken the Wild Hunt's forces by reaching one of their generals, Gels, and convincing him not to aid Eredin. Avallac'h explains that Gels is in another realm, and to reach him, Geralt must travel between worlds through portals. Avallac'h leads Geralt to an old house and down into a cellar where a crack sealed by rubble hides the portal. Geralt breaks the wall, steps through, and begins a journey across multiple hostile worlds. The first takes them to a desert where they follow the next portal's signal while fighting through waves of sand crabs until a new wave opens. After entering it, Geralt and Avallac'h are separated. The second world is filled with poisonous gas and red vegetation. Geralt must run and climb through pockets of clear air, dodge the toxic fog, and find the next portal. After entering that, he finds himself underwater in a third world. The fourth realm is a blizzard-ridden landscape. Geralt breaks through an ice wall with Igni, then sprints between sheltered alcoves to avoid hypothermia and fights off hounds of the Wild Hunt, before reaching a lighthouse with another portal. Emerging from that portal places Geralt in Tirnalia, the elven world where Gels resides. He finds Gels relaxing and confronts him with Avallac'h at his side. There, they converse about allegiance and the fate of the hunt, and Geralt, backed by the logic that the hunt must be weakened, presses Gels to abandon his support of Eredin and instead aligns with them. Avallac'h says that Eredin was the one that killed Gel's king. He uses Corrine Tilly from earlier to produce a dream to show him the truth, showing that Eredin did in fact kill their king, and Gels ultimately agrees to not assist Eredin and instead provides insight into the hunt and strategies for the battle ahead, telling them that they'll need an artifact named the Sunstone to defeat the hunt, which is located in Skellige. Geralt then travels to the Novigrad docks and meets Avallac'h aboard a ship waiting to take him, Ciri, and the rest of their allies to the Skellige Isle. Avallac'h explains that before the end can come, they need one more crucial piece, an ancient elven artifact called the Sunstone, and a few final tasks must be finished first. Once the ship reaches Skellige, the battle preparations begin. Geralt's next task is to find the Sunstone. The search begins with Ermion. Ermion gives Geralt clues as to where the Sunstone can be found. Geralt and Philippa make their way there and inside the elven ruins toward a chamber where ancient mechanisms await. At the center is a mirror puzzle, and a shaft of light must be directed through 3 mirrors so that the final beam strikes the platform where Philippa stands. Philippa then grabs the Sunstone and argues with Geralt a little bit before departing. Going to Yennefer, Yennefer tells him that there's one more potential ally he can bring into the fight, Fringilla Vigo, a sorceress currently imprisoned by the Emperor aboard his flagship, which is now also located in Skellige. Yennefer hands Geralt a letter for Emir, reminding him of their agreement that Fringilla would be released if she helped in the battle against the Wild Hunt. To reach the Emperor's ship, Geralt has to sneak through Nilfgaard's fleet at night. Once Geralt reaches Emir's ship, a soldier recognizes him and lets him climb aboard. Geralt delivers Yennefer's letter to Emir, reminding him of their pact and urging the release of Vigo. Regardless of any past slights, the Emperor agrees. Fringilla is freed on the condition she fights against the Wild Hunt alongside Geralt's group. Immediately afterward, Fringilla teleports Geralt back to Caer Troll. Geralt then finds Yennefer and Ciri discussing their concerns with Avallac'h. They sail to an island off Skellige's coast, drawn there by a mysterious laboratory that Ciri insisted Avallac'h kept secret. When they arrive at a cave entrance, Yennefer works her magic to open the door. Inside the lab, the first thing that stands out are the personal rooms and items. Snacks are left out, a hairbrush, and sketches on the walls. As they explore deeper, Yennefer and Ciri find a large genealogical chart tracking the Elder Blood lineage, connecting Lara Doran straight down to Ciri herself. The realization that Avallac'h treated her like a project weighs on Ciri. Their investigation leads them into a private room where a woman, Avallac'h's lover, insults Ciri with cutting remarks about her blood, her past, and what she represents. Ciri, already emotional, reacts with rage. Geralt can then help her unleash her rage, destroying the room, and they trash Avallac'h's hidden laboratory together. This is one of those choices that can actually affect the ending, as there's a hidden meter deciding your ending depending on your choices with Ciri. Once they leave the lab, Ciri asks Geralt to travel with her to Hindarsfjall, where Skjald's grave lies, the boy who once helped her and died protecting her. They travel to Hindarsfjall, and at the cemetery they begin searching, but they don't find a marked grave. Instead, Geralt and Ciri discover Skell's body thrown in a ditch amongst animal carcasses, treated like trash by those who believed he fled from battle. Ciri is shaken by the sight and insists on doing him right. Nearby Skelligers are offended by Ciri's actions, but Ciri refuses to back down and defends her decision to honor him. There are a few lines of dialogue you can choose during this scene. Geralt and Ciri head back to Kaer Trolde together. Doing this also affects Ciri's emotional arc later in the story, adding to that hidden meter I mentioned earlier. Geralt arrives at the Nilfgaardian camp on Undvik with Avallac'h and the sorceress for the final plan to draw the Wild Hunt into a trap. After a tense briefing, Avallac'h activates the Sunstone, summoning the Hunt's Naglfar, but the plan almost collapses right away when the Hunt's ice magic freezes the Nilfgaardian forces, Geralt, and their allies before they can board the ship. Ciri, seeing the chaos, teleports into the battle. She races across the frozen waters through Wild Hunt warriors and hounds, carving a path straight to Caranthir, the Hunt's ice mancer. During this first phase of the boss fight, you control Ciri. After she damages him significantly, she destroys his magical device, breaking the ice spell that held everyone frozen. The explosion knocks her out, but she is able to quickly teleport out. With the blizzard lifted, Geralt thaws out and steps in to face the rest of the threat. Geralt's fight with Caranthir is brutal. He teleports, fires magical frost projectiles, and summons ice elementals to impede him. Eventually, Caranthir falls, but in a final act, he teleports Geralt underwater in a bid to take him with him. Geralt then swims upward to reach the surface. Once back on the surface, Geralt forges ahead across ice and battlefield, pushing through Wild Hunt forces and skirmishes until he reaches the Naglfar itself. Climbing aboard, ultimately confronts Eredin, who he finds in a battle with Croc. Eredin then kills Croc. Geralt then engages Eredin. Their duel unfolds into multiple stages, including a portal transition where Eredin transports Geralt to a frozen ledge before closing in for a final showdown. Geralt has to melt Eredin's ice armor with Igni and continue damaging him until the king is finally defeated. As Eredin falls, he reveals that Avallac'h manipulated them all for his own purposes. Geralt and Yennefer plunge into the ravaged battlefield, sprinting toward where Avallac'h disappeared. Yennefer leads the way, dodging burning debris and fireballs, and they reach a pair of horses. Mounting up, Geralt follows her through terrain plagued by portals, monsters spilling into the world, heading toward a tower along the coast of Undvik. Standing outside the tower's magical barrier, Yennefer conjures a portal just large enough for Geralt to enter, where Avallac'h waits. The elf makes no offer of resistance when Geralt confronts him, throwing aside his weapon and speaking plainly. He insists he never betrayed him. Ciri left of her own volition because she believed it was the only way to stop the White Frost and save the world, and knew Geralt wouldn't allow her choice. At that moment, Ciri appears. She confirms that she did indeed go with Avallac'h, not because she trusted him, but because she knew it was necessary. She stands at the threshold of the next phase of her journey, a confrontation with the White Frost itself. There's a final loaded choice for Geralt, how he responds to her resolve, and what he tells her here. But no matter what he says, Ciri steps through the gateway into another dimension alone. Her fate now hinges on the totality of all of Geralt's past choices, reflecting whether he encouraged her confidence or instilled doubt in her along the way. The screen has faded to white, and we're left here sitting, not knowing if she survived or not. And I want to talk about how we got here, because The Witcher 3's ending system is genuinely one of the most coherent approaches to player choice that I have ever seen in an RPG. This isn't about picking A, B, or C in a final dialogue wheel. This is about whether you've been a good parent to Ciri throughout the entire game, and the brilliance is that the game never explicitly tells you that it's testing you on this until it's too late to change anything. Let me explain how this actually works. Ciri's fate, whether she lives, dies, or becomes an empress, is determined by a handful of specific choices you made during your time together in Act 3. We're talking about maybe 5 or 6 moments scattered across the last section of the game, things like whether you had a snowball fight with her, whether you let her trash Avallac'h's lab when she was angry, and here's what makes this system so smart. In the moment, they do not feel like ending determining choices. They feel like natural interactions between a parent and a child. They feel like you're just responding to situations as they come up and making decisions on what feels right, just like you've been doing the entire game. There's no big flashing indicator saying this choice determines the ending. No obvious moral framework of good versus evil. You're just being Geralt, being a father figure to this young woman. But what the game is actually measuring is something much more subtle and rich. Are you treating Ciri like her own person, or are you trying to control and protect her? Are you supporting her emotionally, or are you making decisions for her because you think you know better? Take the snowball fight. On the surface, it's this lighthearted moment where Ciri wants to blow off some steam and have fun before things get serious. But what you're actually choosing is whether you recognize the emotional release and support that Ciri actually needs in that moment. Or consider letting her trash Avalok's lab. She's furious, she feels used, she wants to destroy his stuff. You can either let her do it, validating Ciri's choices, or you can tell her to calm down and stay focused. Again, both seem pretty reasonable, but one respects her agency and the emotional state she's in. The other tries to control her. The Lodge meeting is maybe the clearest example. Ciri is about to face this group of incredibly powerful women who have their own agenda regarding her future. You can either go with her, protecting her, but also saying you don't trust her to handle this alone, or you can wait outside and let her deal with them herself. The protective instinct is to go with her, but the choice that respects her as a capable adult is to trust that she can handle it. What's fascinating about this system is that it is completely possible to get the bad ending where Ciri dies while thinking you're making good protective parenting choices the entire time. You can reject the snowball fight because you think staying focused is important. You can stop her from trashing the lab because you think she needs to control her emotions. You can go with her to the lodge because you want to protect her. And every single one of these choices seems reasonable, maybe even noble in the moment. But what you've actually done is spend the entire endgame sending Ciri the message that you don't trust her, that you don't think she's capable, and that she needs you to control her choices and protect her from herself. And when she walks into that tower to face her destiny, she does so without the confidence and self belief she needs to survive, because you have spent this entire time undermining it. The good ending where Ciri survives and becomes a Witcher requires you to consistently choose to trust her, to support her, to let her make her own decisions and deal with her emotions in her own way. It requires you to be the parent who believes in their child's capability rather than the parent who thinks they need to control everything to keep their child safe. And this is the ending that I think brings the whole game around full circle. The whole search for Ciri, all the desperation and fear that drives the first 70% of this game, it's all rooted in Geralt's need to protect the person he loves. But this entire game has been about Geralt learning to let go. The ultimate message is that protection isn't the same as control, and love means trusting someone to face their own destiny, even when you're terrified of losing them. Now, I've seen arguments that this system is too opaque, that players can accidentally get the bad ending without understanding what they did wrong, and I think that there is some validity to that, and a lot of players on their first playthrough make what seem like reasonable choices and then get devastated when Ciri dies and they don't understand why. The game expects you to intuitively grasp that it's measuring your approach to parenting. Not everybody picks up on that. But I also think the clarity is part of what makes this system work, because real parenting isn't knowing which specific moments determine your child's future and optimizing for those moments. It's about your overall approach. The accumulated weight of 1,000 small interactions and choices, the fact that you can't game the system, that you can't just make the right choice at the end to get the outcome you want, means you actually have to think about how you've been treating Ciri throughout the entire game. And honestly, the fact that players get emotionally devastated by the bad ending and immediately want to replay to do better is evidence that the system works. And the other thing I appreciate is that this system doesn't punish you for every choice you make. You don't need to get all 5 or 6 moments right to get the good ending. You just need to get enough of them. The game understands that nobody's perfect, that you might make one protective choice out of fear, but still overall trust Ciri and support her. It's just measuring your overall approach. The game has trusted you to engage with these themes without spelling everything out, and it trusted you to think about what kind of relationship you wanted Geralt and Ciri to have. And now we're all sitting here waiting to see if you made the right choice and hoping that we were good enough. And that is powerful stuff, and that is exactly what a great ending should do. Geralt appears in Vizima to meet the Emperor once more. He tells the Emperor that Ciri chose her own path and won't be returning to Nilfgaard. Amir accepts this and lets Geralt go. Geralt then travels to White Orchard where he meets with a blacksmith who has crafted him a new sword. He then goes to meet Ciri in the inn at White Orchard, the same inn that we begun the game in all those hours ago. Ciri tells Geralt that she's ready to strike out on her own as a witcher, and Geralt gives her a sword he had crafted earlier. She inspects the sword and then says to get to work, ending the game. Now that we've reached the end of the game, I want to talk about one final thing that has been lurking in the background throughout this entire retrospective, which is the pacing. The Witcher 3 has a really unusual structure that I think works in some ways and creates genuine problems in others. This is a game where you spend about 70% of your time searching for Ciri, slowly following leads and getting sidetracked by the lives of everyone you meet along the way. And then the remaining 30% is a compressed sprint through gathering allies, fighting the wild hunt, and determining the fate of the world. And that imbalance creates this weird tonal and structural whiplash that I think is worth examining now that we've experienced the full arc. Let's break down how the pacing works in each section. White Orchard, like I said earlier, is deliberately slow. We've talked about this already. It's teaching you how to be a Witcher, establish the world, and set up the core gameplay loop. It's more patient here, maybe too patient for some players, but it's clearly intentional. Velen has pretty good pacing, at least for the Baron quest line. There's a clear through line, the stakes escalate naturally, and even though you're doing Help Me First quests, they feel connected to the larger narrative. The problem is that Velen is also massive and filled with contracts and side content, so the pacing becomes entirely dependent on player behavior. If you're a completionist, Velen can stretch for 30 plus hours. If you're just main quest focused, you might do it in 10. Novigrad is for me where the pacing really starts to drag. The Dandelion investigation is structured as a series of talk to this person, who sends you to this person, who sends you to this person. And while the individual character moments are great, like the play, the overall momentum for me stalls out here. You spend so much time in Novigrad just chasing leads that go nowhere or just take forever to pay off. The city is incredible, and the side content here is some of the best in the game, but the main quest here loses some urgency for me and starts to kind of dial back the pace that I really feel like we were starting to ramp up. Skellige picks things back up. The investigation here feels more focused. Like I said, the flashbacks here are better, and there's a sense that you're actually getting close to finding Ciri. And then you find Ciri finally, and suddenly, after spending 40, 50, 60 plus hours piecing together where Ciri has been, you've got her back, and the game feels like, okay, now we're doing the actual story. You're gathering allies, preparing for battle, making decisions that will determine the fate of the world, and the Wild Hunt goes from being this distant threat to an immediate danger. The pacing accelerates dramatically, and while some of this is exciting and well executed, it also feels pretty rushed compared to the meandering investigation that dominated the first 70% of the game. For the vast majority of the game, you're encouraged to take your time, play Gwent, do contracts, explore question marks, help NPCs with their problem, engage with all the side content the game throws at you. And the narrative structure here supports this. Sometimes you're following a trail that's weeks or months old. There's no immediate time pressure, and sometimes you might just need money. So it makes sense. But then Act 2 and especially Act 3 hit, and suddenly the tone is the Wild Hunt is here, the White Frost is coming, everybody you love is in danger, you need to act now. Except the game still lets you go play Gwent and do contracts and mess around with side content, which creates this like dissonance. Narratively, the world is ending, but mechanically, you've still got time to help some random guy. Now, this is a problem inherent with any open world RPG where the gameplay systems and the narrative urgency are in conflict. But I think the Witcher 3 structure escalates this problem because the shift from investigation to apocalypse is very abrupt. The Witcher 3 spends hours telling you it's okay to get sidetracked, and then suddenly it's not okay anymore. The 70-30 split also means that the actual conflict with the Wild Hunt feels compressed and underdeveloped compared to the investigation of where Ciri went. You spent all this time learning about the Baron's family, about Novigrad's politics, about this war between Nilfgaard and the Northern Kingdoms, but the Wild Hunt themselves, you really only fight them a handful of times. They're not bad villains, but they're definitely underbaked compared to how much time the game spends on other narrative threads. And I think that part of the problem is that CDPR wanted to have it both ways. They wanted to have this epic world-ending conflict with the Wild Hunt, but they also wanted the slow burn, character focused investigation story, and both of these things are good. The investigation is where some of the game's best writing lives. The Wild Hunt conflict provides the high stakes climax the story needs, but the balance between them, and especially that shift between them, feels off, with too much time for me being spent on Ciri's investigation, or maybe the right way to look at it is that the Wild Hunt half of the game just wasn't long enough. I think finding Ciri should have been more at the half point rather than the 70% mark, so you have more time to spend with her and develop a relationship for people who haven't read the books. And I think the game already does a fantastic job of doing that if you haven't read the books. But what's the problem with more? I think it would have really helped the game had the Wild Hunt been sort of expanded on more than they already were, because really we only know Eridan as just this evil guy. I want to know more about him, but we never do. Now, I just want to be clear, I do not think the end game is bad. The Battle of Kaer Morhen is fantastic, and the final confrontations here are well done, and the epilogue sequences are very emotional. It's just the pacing of how we get there, the sudden shift from take your time to everything's happening right now. Despite all these pacing issues, The Witcher 3 still works. It works because the writing is so strong, because the characters are compelling, and because the world is so rich that you don't mind spending time in it even when the main plot isn't advancing. The pacing isn't ideal, but the quality of the content overcomes a lot of these structural problems. Would the game be better with balanced pacing? Probably, yeah. Would it be better if the Wild Hunt felt as developed as the Baron? Absolutely. Would it benefit from a smoother transition between the investigation and the endgame? No question. But would I trade the long, meandering investigation for a tightly paced experience? Honestly, I don't think I would. Because that 70% that I talked about is where so much of what makes the game special lives. I just love the Bloody Baron, the political intrigue of Novigrad, and exploring Skellige Isles. All of that exists because the game gave itself permission to slow down and let you exist in the world. So, here we are. Roughly 100 hours later, countless contracts completed, Gwent cards collected, monsters slain, and impossible choices made. Ciri's fate has been determined for better or worse, and Geralt's journey has reached its conclusion. And after spending all this time examining what makes The Witcher 3 work, breaking down its systems, praising its highs, and critiquing its lows, I want to step back and ask the question that started this whole thing. Why does this game matter 10 years later, and why does it still outclass other RPGs? Because here's the thing. We've talked about imperfect combat that never reaches the heights of the game around it. We talked about pacing issues, lopsided structure. We've acknowledged occasionally frustrating help me first quest structure, the weak early flashbacks, the crossbow that might as well just not exist. These aren't small issues, and in a lesser game, they'd be fatal flaws that drag down the entire experience. But The Witcher 3 isn't a lesser game. It's a game that transcends its shortcomings through the sheer strength of its writing, its world building, and its understanding of what makes stories resonate with people. The Witcher 3 succeeds not because it's perfect at everything, but because it's exceptional at the things that matter the most. Think about the moments that have stuck with you from this game. I'm willing to bet they're not the time that I used the crossbow really effectively or the perfectly balanced difficulty. It's the Bloody Baron realizing what he's done to his family, brief moments with Ciri, that quiet conversation with Vesemir before the battle, not knowing it would be his last. They're the agonizing choice between killing the tree spirit or letting it slaughter a village. The snowball fight that seemed inconsequential, but determined whether you were the parent Ciri needed. And these are the moments that matter. CDPR understood that better than almost any other developer working in this space. They knew that if they nailed the characters, the writing, and the complexity of the morals and these emotional beats, players would forgive a lot of the mechanical imperfection. And they were right. We've examined how Velen, Novigrad, and Skellige each deliver completely different RPG experiences, different tones, different quest structures, different gameplay philosophies, and yet somehow it all still feels cohesive. That's not an accident. That's just masterful design that understands variety doesn't mean changing the color palette. It means fundamentally rethinking how you approach storytelling and gameplay in each of its spaces. But I think what really sets The Witcher 3 apart, what makes it still worth analyzing and celebrating over a decade later, is how it approaches the concept of player choice. Because this isn't a game where you make obvious moral decisions and the game judges you as good or evil. This is a game where you're constantly making choices that feel right in the moment and only later realizing you might have been wrong, or that the right choice created consequences you could never have anticipated. The ending with Ciri, like I said, is just the purest form of this philosophy. The game spent the entire runtime measuring whether you treated Ciri like a capable person or like someone who needed to be controlled. And it never told you it was doing this. It just trusted you to engage with these themes, to think about what kind of parent Geralt should be, to make choices based on character rather than optimizing. When players get the bad ending and realize their well intentioned choices doom Ciri, the devastation is real because it mirrors how real parents might make similar mistakes with their real children. Looking back at everything we've covered, what emerges is a picture of a game that knew exactly what it wanted to be and had the confidence to commit to that vision, even when it meant making unconventional choices. CDPR could have made the combat more complex and refined, but they chose to invest those resources into quest design instead. They could have tightened pacing and cut content to make a linear experience, but they chose to let you exist in the world and take your time with it. Every decision was made in service of creating this world that felt real, characters that felt human, and stories that resonated emotionally. And nearly 10 years later, when we're surrounded by bigger games, prettier games, games with more refined combat and more modern mechanics, The Witcher 3 still stands out because it understood something fundamental. Mechanics age, but great storytelling endures. That brings us to the future. The Witcher 4 is coming. Maybe we're getting that new DLC that bridges the gap. The franchise continues, and I'm curious, maybe even a little bit nervous, that whatever comes next can capture what made The Witcher 3 so special. Because you can copy the systems, you can replicate the structure, you can build a bigger, better open world with more refined mechanics, but you can't manufacture the magic that happens when exceptional writing, compelling characters, and thoughtful design all come together in a coherent vision. The Witcher 3 isn't perfect, but perfection was never the point. The point was creating an experience that makes you think, makes you feel, makes you care about choices you make and the people affected by them. The point was crafting a world rich enough that you want to exist in it even when there's no objective pushing you forward. The point was telling a story about family, sacrifice, and letting go that resonates on a deeply human level despite all these monsters and magic. And on that measure, one that actually matters, The Witcher doesn't just exceed, it excels in ways that few games have before or since. So yeah, the combat is a 7 out of 10. The pacing is lopsided, and these early Ciri flashbacks are weak. Those aren't the things I remember. I remember the Baron, the snowball fight, and the beauty of Skellige. I remember a game that trusted me enough to let me fail, that respected me enough to not spell out every moral dimension, that cared enough about its characters to give them complexity and depth and real emotional weight. That's why The Witcher 3 still outclasses other modern RPGs. Not because it does everything perfectly, but because it understands what matters and executes on that vision with unwavering confidence. And that's why, even with The Witcher 4 on the horizon, even with potential new DLC coming, even over 10 years later after release, this game is still worth celebrating, still worth analyzing, and absolutely still worth playing. Thank you for joining me on this massive journey on one of gaming's masterpieces. I hope to cover Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine in future videos, and somehow, from what I remember, these expansions managed to be better than the actual game that came before. If you're still watching, I actually wanted to ask you something. I actually haven't started writing the Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine scripts yet. So, if you're seeing this and you made it all the way to the end, I just want to ask for feedback before I get to that. Do you enjoy the recap sections, or do you think I should tone them back or completely get rid of them at all? Or do you think they're perfectly fine as they are? Let me know what you think, and if there's anything else you can think I can improve into the Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine videos, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.